Before the sun had even risen, Paris was already awake with an unusual tension. Lanterns swung from the hands of soldiers marching through narrow streets, their flames bending in the cold October wind. Horses exhaled clouds of mist as armored boots clattered against cobblestone, each step echoing like a warning whispered to the sleeping city. It was October 13th, 1307, a morning that would carve itself into European memory, a morning when one of the most powerful sacred brotherhoods in history was extinguished in darkness. Behind shuttered windows, people watched as soldiers split into groups, approaching inns, commanderies, and quiet stone houses where the Knights Templar slept unaware of the trap closing around them. The order had stood for 2 centuries, famous for its discipline, its wealth, and its unwavering loyalty to God. Yet on this morning, none of that mattered. Every knight, from seasoned commander to humble initiate, was about to be seized under the orders of King Philip IV of France. The soldiers moved quickly, pulling chains from their belts, tightening grips around their swords. Their mission was clear. No warning, no hesitation, no mercy. Many had heard rumors, but no one fully understood why an order blessed by popes and kings had suddenly become the enemy. Some whispered that the Templars possessed secrets too dangerous for the world. Others feared that they had angered the king with their power. Yet even the soldiers carrying out the arrests did not know the full truth. Inside the Templar commandery near the Seine, the knights were beginning their morning prayers. The chapel glowed softly with candles illuminating the carved stone walls. Their voices rose together in a steady chant, ancient, familiar, serene. The final moment of peace before the storm. Suddenly, the heavy doors of the chapel burst open. Cold winds surged in, blowing out candles and scattering the warmth of prayer into darkness. Torches flooded the hall with violent light as royal soldiers surged inside. Metal clashed as knights instinctively reached for weapons, only to find themselves surrounded, outnumbered, trapped. Some resisted, not out of rebellion but confusion. Others raised their hands, stunned, asking what crime they were accused of. But the soldiers had rehearsed their lines. By order of the king. That was all. That was enough. The Grand Preceptor of France, Geoffroy de Charny, stepped forward, demanding an explanation. His voice was calm, disciplined, trained by years of command. But even he found no answers. The soldiers dragged him away along with dozens of his brothers, chains scraping against the stone floor of the commandery like a metallic lament. Across France, similar scenes unfolded. In churches, farms, fortresses, and even roadside shelters. The arrests were synchronized with military precision. By nightfall, hundreds of knights were bound in prisons, stripped of their dignity, their possessions confiscated, their order accused of heresy, blasphemy, and crimes so horrific they seemed designed to stain the Templars forever. As the news spread, people filled the streets, whispering in fear and fascination. Mothers wrapped their arms around their children, telling them not to look at the soldiers dragging the once-honored knights through town squares. Merchants watched the spectacle from their stalls, wondering if their debts to the Templars would vanish along with the order. Priests struggled to understand how an institution defended by the Church for generations had suddenly been declared corrupt and dangerous. In the shadows, informants whispered to one another, sharing rumors the king's agents had planted. Confessions of dark rituals, strange symbols, forbidden rites. Many suspected these accusations were false, designed to justify the king's thirst for the Templars' gold. But the danger was real. Anyone who defended the knights risked punishment themselves. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Templars, was in Paris at the time. He had attended a royal ceremony just days earlier, standing beside King Philip with no hint of the impending betrayal. When soldiers seized him, he asked why the king had turned against the order that had served France so loyally. The answer he received was silence. Cold stone walls and an iron door slammed shut behind him, leaving him alone with the betrayal that would define the rest of his life. The king's motivation was more complicated than greed alone. Philip IV was drowning in debt. Wars, lavish spending, and political ambitions had drained his treasury. The Templars, with their immense wealth and unparalleled international banking network, stood as a tempting solution. But even more unsettling to the king was the mysterious aura that surrounded the order. Their secrecy, their independence, their rumored knowledge uncovered beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem centuries earlier. Philip did not merely want their gold. He wanted to break their power, erase their influence, and claim whatever hidden truths they guarded. In the days that followed, the prisoners were interrogated relentlessly. Chains cut into their wrists, torches burned too close to their skin. Clergymen loyal to the king pressed them for confessions, demanding details of secret ceremonies, many of which the knights insisted did not exist. Pain twisted truth, and under torment, some gave false confessions, desperate to stop the suffering. Others remained silent, clinging to honor even as their bodies failed. Yet outside the prison walls, something more unsettling spread through the kingdom. The feeling that this was no ordinary purge. People whispered that the Templars had discovered something long ago in Jerusalem, something sacred or dangerous, something powerful enough that even kings feared it. A secret that had now become the justification for their destruction. As the first week of arrests ended, the sky above Paris remained heavy with smoke from the torches. The once mighty order that had protected pilgrims, fought in crusades, built fortresses, and shaped the medieval world had been reduced to prisoners awaiting judgment. But in the silence of the night, as soldiers patrolled the streets and frightened citizens barred their doors, one question lingered in the darkness. A question that neither king, priest, nor torturer could answer. What secret buried in the Templars' past was so dangerous, so transformative, that destroying the entire order seemed the only way to keep it hidden? The world had witnessed the fall. The mystery behind it was only beginning. The air in Jerusalem carried a strange mixture of dust, incense, and distant prayer. It was a scent the early Templars would never forget. The smell of the holy city, the spiritual center of their mission, and the place that would transform their order forever. When the 9 founding knights first arrived, they expected hardship. They expected danger. They expected to offer their swords to protect pilgrims traveling the narrow paths leading to the city. What they didn't expect was the silence of the Temple Mount. The great platform once home to the ancient Temple of Solomon loomed above them like a memory carved in stone. It was sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike, but it also carried centuries of unresolved history. Destroyed sanctuaries, buried chambers, forgotten rituals. Most travelers saw only ruins. The Templars saw a calling. King Baldwin II granted the knights a temporary residence in what had once been part of the old temple complex. The world knows the place as the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but to the Templars it was the Templum Solomonis, the House of Solomon. Its walls hummed with history, its foundations whispered secrets. And it was here, in this charged silence, that the Brotherhood found its true identity. The building was enormous compared to anything they had known in Europe. Its hallways stretched into shadows, its stonework carrying the weight of centuries. The knights slept in cold chambers, prayed in dimly lit corners, trained in the courtyards, and patrolled the vast platform day and night. Yet something about the place seemed incomplete, as if there was more beneath their feet than the simple stone floors. At night, when the city quieted and only the distant call of watchmen echoed through the alleys, some knights reported hearing strange groans from beneath the ground. Ancient timbers shifting, stones settling, or perhaps something older stirring in the darkness. At first, they dismissed the sounds as the settling of old structures. But soon, the whispers spread. Beneath the Temple Mount were corridors, tunnels, chambers, and forgotten passageways left untouched for centuries. The Templars were not scholars. They were not archaeologists. They were warriors with a vow of poverty and purity. And yet, the idea of hidden knowledge buried beneath the very foundation of their sanctuary gripped them with a force they could not ignore. Historical records are vague, but scattered accounts, letters, chronicles, and later testimonies, describe a period when the knights withdrew from public life. For nearly a decade, the early Templars seemed to vanish from the political stage of Jerusalem. They were present, but secluded, hushed, focused on something unknown. Their numbers remained small, their influence limited, their role modest. Yet the rumors grew. One pilgrim claimed to see wagons bringing tools into the Templar quarters under heavy guard. Another story tells of nights when the mount echoed with the clang of picks striking stone. Whatever the truth, the knights appeared to be excavating, quietly, methodically, and with a sense of purpose that suggests they believed something extraordinary lay waiting in the earth. Years later, Muslim chroniclers would describe the Templars as those who seek the secrets beneath the temple. Even some Christian writers hinted at a discovery, scrolls, relics, perhaps even architectural blueprints from the Age of Solomon. Whatever they found, if they found anything at all, it was never openly revealed. Yet from this period of silence emerged a transformed order. Before Jerusalem, the Templars were simply 9 knights. After Jerusalem, their reputation exploded. They suddenly possessed knowledge of languages, rituals, and engineering that surpassed what their members were known to have studied. They built fortresses with mathematical precision. They adopted symbols, the equal-armed cross, the lamb, the serpent, the chalice, that blended Christian imagery with motifs older than the faith itself. And perhaps most strikingly, they introduced rules and practices that mirrored traditions found not in Europe, but in ancient Near Eastern monastic movements. It was as if Jerusalem had reshaped them from within. The locals observed the change too. Some said the Templars had been taught by hidden sages. Others believed they had found traces of the priesthood that once served in Solomon's temple, inheriting fragments of their sacred teachings. And a more dangerous rumor circulated quietly, that the Templars had uncovered texts the church did not possess. Early writings, alternate interpretations of scripture, or records of forgotten prophets. Whatever they carried away from Jerusalem was not simply spiritual. Their discipline sharpened. Their rituals became more codified. Their hierarchy more defined. These transformations did not happen gradually across generations. They appeared abruptly within a single decade. One particular Latin account mentions an object sealed in a chest, transported under heavy guard from Jerusalem to Europe. The chronicle does not describe the object, only noting a mark in the shape of a twisted cross, burned into the wood. Some historians dismiss this as medieval storytelling. Others believe it points to a discovery the knights believed too powerful or too sacred to expose. Whether relic, text, or stone tablet, the object supposedly never resurfaced. Still, the Templars kept digging. The network of tunnels beneath the Temple Mount grew, some carved by earlier civilizations, some expanded by the knights themselves. They studied the geometry of the platform, mapped its angles, measured its distances. They developed an understanding of sacred proportions that would later appear in their churches and fortresses across Europe. Their time in Jerusalem also brought them into contact with scholars of the Islamic world. The city was a crossroads of knowledge. Arabic texts on astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and philosophy circulated among learned men. Some Templars, fluent in multiple languages, befriended these scholars, learning ideas Europe had not yet embraced. Ideas about the soul, the cosmos, and the nature of divine order. To many Europeans, the Holy Land was simply a battlefield. To the Templars, it became a library. And as the years passed, the order's reputation grew. They were no longer simply warriors. They were guardians of mysteries, defenders of an ancient legacy, the chosen protectors of the place where prophecy, faith, and history converged. By the time they emerged from their period of seclusion, they were different men, more focused, more disciplined, more certain of their purpose. They had become an order with a destiny, not merely one handed to them by kings or clergy, but one they believed was etched into the foundation of the temple itself. The transformation was so profound that when the Templars eventually returned to Europe to secure papal recognition and funding, even seasoned church leaders sensed something unusual about them. They spoke with an authority beyond their small numbers. They negotiated like men certain they carried divine sanction. And they guarded their newfound knowledge with a secrecy that became the hallmark of their order. What happened beneath the Temple Mount remains one of the most compelling mysteries in medieval history. Whether they discovered forgotten relics, ancient teachings, or simply found clarity through contemplation in a sacred space, the impact was undeniable. Something awakened in them in Jerusalem, something powerful enough to reshape a brotherhood and echo across centuries. And as Europe welcomed them home, unaware of the transformation these 9 knights had undergone, a new chapter in the Templars' story began. A rise unlike anything the medieval world had ever seen. The paradox lay at the very heart of the order. How could a man swear vows of silence, humility, and poverty, yet ride into battle armored in steel, wielding a sword blessed by holy rites, and strike down his enemies with fierce precision? How could a monk become a warrior without betraying the core of his faith? To the outside world, the Knights Templar seemed like an impossible contradiction, a union of opposites that should never have existed. Yet it was precisely this fusion that gave the order its power, its mystery, and its unshakable identity. In their earliest years, the Templars lived more like ascetics than soldiers. Their clothing was coarse. Their meals were simple. Their days began before dawn, with long stretches of prayer woven into the rhythm of their duties. They slept in shared dormitories, never alone, never comfortable, always disciplined. Every rule, every gesture, every moment of silence was designed to strip away pride and strengthen obedience. The sword, in those days, was only an extension of their faith, a tool used not to dominate but to protect. And yet, on the battlefield, these quiet monks transformed into forces of unstoppable momentum. Chronicles describe them as men who rode like thunder on the plain, striking with a ferocity unmatched by ordinary knights. They fought with a clarity that bordered on the unbelievable, maintaining formation under impossible odds, advancing even when their enemies towered over them in number. Their discipline was absolute, their courage unwavering. It was as if they entered a different state of being when they crossed into the chaos of combat. Some contemporary writers believed the Templars possessed a spiritual technique that allowed them to detach from fear. Others suspected that their rituals, the whispered vows, the meditations, the nights spent in silent contemplation, gave them a mental armor as strong as any chainmail. In a world where most warriors fought driven by adrenaline or bloodlust, the Templars fought with purpose, focus, and unsettling calm. They were not merely fighting for survival. They believed they were fulfilling a divine mission. But the contradiction did not end there. Their vow of poverty was another puzzle that puzzled kings and commoners alike. Individually, the knights owned nothing. Not their horses, not their armor, not even the bread they ate each morning. Everything belonged to the order. Yet, as a collective, the Templars grew wealthier than some kingdoms. Donations flowed in from across Europe. Land, gold, animals, tools, entire villages. Everything given to the order was to be used not for luxury, but for the mission, to defend pilgrims and protect the Holy Land. This unique financial model created an unusual dynamic. A Templar knight could sleep on a thin mattress in a stone cell, wearing patched clothing and eating plain food, while his order managed complex banking systems, shipped goods across continents, and built fortresses that rivaled those of kings. They lived as paupers but commanded the resources of an empire. It was this duality, humble monk and unstoppable warrior, penniless individual and wealthy institution, that gave rise to myths. People whispered that the Templars had access to knowledge ordinary Christians did not. How else could they embrace contradiction so effortlessly? How else could they carry themselves with such confidence, even in the presence of royalty? Travelers in the East spoke of mystical warriors from other cultures, Sufi fighters, Buddhist monks, ascetic hermits, who blended physical discipline with spiritual clarity. Some historians argue that the Templars adopted practices from these traditions during their time in the Holy Land. Whether through observation or direct exchange, they may have learned forms of breathing, meditation, and mental focus that European knights had never seen before. But the Templars wrapped these influences in Christian symbolism, weaving them into the fabric of their rituals. Their ceremonies emphasized purification through intention, unity through silence, and mastery through obedience. To them, contradiction was not something to be resolved. It was something to be embraced. A knight who trained his body but neglected his spirit was incomplete. A monk who cultivated faith but feared battle was unprepared. Only by holding both identities at once could a Templar fulfill his purpose. This duality also shaped the order's internal culture. When a new recruit arrived, he was not simply handed a sword and taught to fight. He was first broken down and rebuilt through months, sometimes years, of instruction. He learned how to pray in unison, how to sit in silence, how to restrain emotion until it served a higher purpose. He learned the discipline of rising before dawn, of caring for his brothers before himself, of giving up personal ambition in favor of collective duty. And then, almost abruptly, he was taught to fight. Templar combat training was not only physical, it was psychological. Recruits were pushed to their limits to reveal their inner fears and attachments. They learned to find calm in exhaustion, clarity in chaos, and conviction in the face of death. When they finally entered battle, they did so with a mind sharpened like a blade, aware, steady, unshaken. This inner strength made them formidable, but it also made them unsettling. Other knights would sometimes comment that Templars seemed almost otherworldly when they rode into war. Their formation did not break. Their resolve did not waver. They followed orders without hesitation, as if listening to a voice no one else could hear. Such discipline came with a cost. The Templars were feared by their enemies, respected by their allies, but often misunderstood by the world around them. They stood apart even within the Crusader armies, a brotherhood within an army, a spiritual order within a military machine. Some admired them, others distrusted them, and over time, rumors grew that their strength came from something hidden, something taught to them in underground chambers beneath Jerusalem. Whispers spread that they practiced secret rites that shaped their minds and bonded their spirits. Rituals that might explain how a group of monks could become an elite fighting force. Rituals that taught them how to quiet fear and place mission above all else. By the time the Templars reached the height of their influence, they no longer seemed like ordinary men. They appeared to be living symbols, warriors who had transcended the boundaries between the physical and the divine. Their contradictions did not weaken them. They made them unstoppable. And though the world admired their purity and power, few realized how deeply the roots of their identity extended into ancient traditions, hidden teachings, and long-forgotten philosophies that shaped the order from within. The Templars were not simply an army. They were a mystery made flesh, and the world was only beginning to understand just how profound that mystery truly was. In the early days of the Templar Order, when the world still saw them as little more than a handful of determined knights clinging to a fragile dream, a quiet influence shaped their destiny from the shadows. The chronicles speak of the 9 founding knights led by Hugh de Payens, men bound by faith, loyalty, and a mission greater than any single warrior could understand. But scattered through obscure manuscripts and later testimonies is the faint trace of a 10th presence. A mentor who left no signature, no title, no official position, and yet guided the order with a subtle but undeniable hand. The rule of the Templars, the code that governed every moment of their lives, did not emerge spontaneously. Its language held intricacies far beyond what 9 battle-worn knights could have crafted alone. Some of its passages mirrored monastic traditions from Benedictine and Cistercian orders. Others hinted at older, more enigmatic sources, rules that echoed teachings from Eastern ascetic movements, Jewish mysticism, and even pre-Christian warrior codes. This unusual mix led many historians to suspect that someone outside the founding circle helped shape the spiritual architecture of the order. That someone was the hidden teacher. He was never named directly, but certain documents refer vaguely to the learned brother who counseled the knights, or the elder who walked the sacred path with them. Who was this man? A monk? A hermit? A scholar of ancient languages? Or perhaps a mystic who understood the deeper significance of the Temple Mount better than anyone else alive? One theory suggests he was a Cistercian monk, possibly even the brilliant Bernard of Clairvaux, whose influence later became central to the Templars' papal recognition. Bernard's intellect, his understanding of spiritual discipline, and his connection to Europe's most powerful religious circles made him the ideal architect of the rule. But the timing raises questions. The rule was being shaped even before Bernard formally advocated for the order. Could he have advised them in secret? Or was the teacher someone else entirely? Someone Bernard later supported because he recognized a shared spiritual lineage? Another theory points toward an Eastern Christian monk living in Jerusalem, one who possessed ancient knowledge preserved through centuries of turmoil. The early Crusader kingdom was filled with hermits and guardians of forgotten traditions. Some lived in caves near the Jordan River, others near old monasteries carved into desert cliffs. Their worlds existed parallel to the ambitions of kings and knights, yet occasionally their paths crossed, leaving marks on history that are visible only in faint outlines. Imagine Hugh de Payens and his companions walking the dusty streets of Jerusalem, seeking guidance not from Latin priests sent from Europe, but from a local ascetic whose understanding of sacred space reached back to the days of the Second Temple. Imagine them sitting in a dimly lit chamber, listening to teachings that blended scripture with spiritual geometry, ritual discipline with ancient memory, teachings that would become the living backbone of their order. Some accounts speak of this mentor teaching the knights about silence, not merely as the absence of speech, but as a tool for anchoring the mind. Others suggest he introduced them to controlled breathing and meditative stillness, practices that would later help them maintain calm even in the chaos of battle. Still others claim he taught them the symbolic meaning of the temple itself, the idea that the physical structure mirrored the architecture of the soul. If so, this influence would explain why the Templars saw their mission not as a military duty alone, but as a spiritual transformation. The rule they received contained layers of meaning. On the surface, it prescribed daily behavior, when to pray, how to eat, how to dress. But beneath that structure lay something deeper, a system designed to break ego, sharpen intention, and align the mind with the divine. These hidden layers were not obvious to outsiders. Even many members of the order may never have realized the full extent of what they were practicing. But for those who studied the rule carefully, ancient wisdom pulsed beneath its surface. This is where the mystery of the 10th man becomes most intriguing. His influence, though unnamed, appears woven through every aspect of the order's early development. The unusual fusion of martial discipline and spiritual rigor, the cryptic symbolism embedded in their ceremonies, the esoteric echoes in their architecture. None of it matches the worldview of simple European knights. Feels older, deeper, rooted in traditions that predate Christendom's arrival in the Holy Land. Some Templar documents refer to a private initiation for the earliest members, a ceremony separate from the public vows accepted by the Church. If true, it suggests the founding knights received teachings never fully passed down to later generations. Teachings that originated from the mentor who shaped them. Teachings that may have been considered too dangerous, too transformative, or too unorthodox to reveal openly. This hidden teacher is also linked to the Templars' sudden rise after years of obscurity. It was as if someone had given them a blueprint, not just for spiritual discipline, but for organization, diplomacy, and influence. When Hugh de Payens traveled back to Europe to secure papal support, he carried with him more than the courage of a small band of knights. He carried a polished vision, a fully formed monastic identity. He brought a rule that impressed the Church, strategies that appealed to monarchs, and a philosophy that resonated with nobles seeking purpose. This level of preparation does not emerge spontaneously. It requires guidance, structure, and wisdom that reaches beyond ordinary experience. Whoever the mentor was, he understood the power of secrecy. True spiritual transformation, he likely believed, flourished in silence and discipline, not in public acclaim. The teacher's anonymity itself became part of the Templar legacy, a reminder that the order was guided not by ego, but by a deeper, more ancient current of knowledge. As the order grew, expanding across continents, the memory of this hidden influence faded. But hints remained, in symbolic carvings, in obscure passages of the rule, in fragmented notes from early chroniclers, and perhaps most tellingly, in the unwavering conviction the Templars carried into every battle, every negotiation, every prayer. They believed they had been chosen, not by kings or clergy, but by destiny. And destiny, it seems, had spoken to them through a voice that refused to leave its name behind. Who was the hidden teacher? A monk, a mystic, a scholar, a hermit, or something altogether different? The answer remains buried in the shadows of early Templar history, but his influence shaped everything that followed. Without him, the order would not have matured into the powerful, enigmatic brotherhood history remembers. With him, they became more than warriors. They became keepers of a secret lineage the world still struggles to understand. The Temple Mount stood beneath the blazing Jerusalem sun like a monument frozen between worlds, part ruin, part sanctuary, part enigma. Long before the Templars ever set foot upon its ancient stones, the Mount had been at the center of prophecies, wars, and spiritual visions. It was said to be the place where Abraham proved his faith, where Solomon built the house of God, where kings were crowned and prophets delivered their warnings. Layer upon layer of history lay hidden beneath its surface, and the earth itself seemed to hum with secrets no one had touched for centuries. When the Templars took residence atop this sacred platform, they assumed they were simply stepping into a historic site. They believed their role was to guard pilgrims and maintain the safety of the holy city. But it did not take long for the knights to sense that the Temple Mount held far more than broken walls and weathered pillars. There were stories everywhere. Rumors that the foundations hid passageways untouched since the fall of Jerusalem to the Babylonians, that the Crusaders before them had never explored the deepest layers of the Mount, that treasures and sacred writings were still sealed where Solomon's priests once prayed. As the Templars settled into their new life, they began to hear whispers from locals about secret chambers beneath the earth, about deep wells and tunnels carved by ancient masons, about doors sealed with signs no living man could interpret. Some of these stories came from Christian pilgrims. Others were shared by Muslim scholars who had preserved older traditions. Even Jewish mystics, passing quietly through the city, spoke of sacred artifacts hidden beneath the foundation stone, placed there to safeguard knowledge too powerful for the unworthy. The knights listened, and slowly a plan took shape. At first, no one noticed the small changes. A handful of knights requesting tools usually reserved for builders. Wagons delivering materials to the Templar quarters at odd hours. Guards posted in unusual positions along the southern and eastern walls. But as weeks turned into months, the signs became impossible to ignore. Something was happening beneath the Temple Mount, something the Templars did not intend to share with the world. The excavations, as later accounts would call them, were conducted with absolute secrecy. Only a select group of knights participated, likely chosen for their discipline and trustworthiness. Even within the order, few knew what the digging was truly for. The work was done at night or behind barricaded doorways. Dust-covered tunics, bruised hands, and exhaustion became common among the chosen few, but they spoke nothing of their tasks. Silence was the rule, and the rule was sacred. What exactly they found in those years remains one of the greatest mysteries of medieval history. Chronicles from the period make only passing references. A letter from a visiting abbot mentions unusual activity within the temple precincts. An Arab historian later wrote that the Franks were hunting for the secrets of Solomon. A Jewish traveler recorded hearing from a local guide that the foreign knights descend into the earth at night, searching for the foundations of the great house. But hidden among these scattered accounts are clues. One speaks of a large stone slab discovered beneath the mount, carved with symbols not recognized by the knights. Another hints that the Templars uncovered a hollowed chamber containing pottery fragments and rusted metal objects. And in one obscure monastic text, a monk claims that the Templars found scrolls of ancient writing beyond the understanding of our age. Some believe these were remnants of Hebrew priestly records, perhaps even writings carried off before the destruction of the First Temple. Then there is the most tantalizing rumor, the chest. According to a late medieval tradition, the Templars discovered a sealed chest in a side chamber beneath the Temple Mount. The chest was bound with iron bands and marked with a sigil no knight could decipher. It was said to emit a faint, metallic scent when touched, as if the air inside it had never been exposed to the world above. Whatever lay within that chest, if it existed at all, was transported under heavy guard. Only a handful of knights ever laid eyes on it, and it vanished from all historical record after leaving Jerusalem. Some believe it contained gold or relics. Others claim it held texts, writings from before the exile, perhaps even fragments of the Ark's guardianship traditions. And then there are those who suggest it contains something far stranger. Diagrams, measurements, or architectural codes that explained the true structure of Solomon's temple, including knowledge lost for millennia. Even without definitive proof, the consequences of the excavations were undeniable. After their time beneath the Mount, the Templars' understanding of sacred geometry transformed. Their churches in Europe were built with mathematical precision that defied the architectural knowledge of the period. Some were round, echoing the shape of the Holy Sepulchre, others aligned with celestial patterns. They measured everything: walls, distances, angles, with a meticulousness that suggested they were following a blueprint far older than themselves. This new knowledge also shaped their internal symbols. Where European knights wore crosses and heraldic animals, the Templars adopted imagery that blended Christian motifs with ancient ones. The lamb, the serpent, the chalice, the double cross. These symbols resonated with layered meaning, as if drawn from traditions absorbed during their time on the Mount. Whatever they found beneath the temple, it changed them, but it also awakened suspicion. Locals noticed their secrecy and began to whisper that the knights were practicing strange rites. Some claimed the Templars prayed beneath the earth rather than in the open air. Others believed they had discovered hidden texts that altered their understanding of faith. Whether true or not, these whispers followed the order back to Europe and lingered for generations, eventually becoming part of the accusations made against them centuries later. Still, the most enduring mystery remains what they carried out of those tunnels. Was it a relic of immense power? A text that challenged established doctrine? A piece of lost architecture that revealed secrets of divine proportions? Or was it simply knowledge, deeper insight into the ancient world, its rituals, its symbols, its sense of the sacred? The truth lies buried beneath stone and centuries, hidden in chambers long sealed or lost to time. Yet one thing is certain: the Templars did not leave the Temple Mount as the same men who arrived. They carried something with them, whether physical or spiritual, that shaped the destiny of their order and haunted its memory long after its fall. They descended into the earth seeking answers. Whatever they found, it changed the course of history. The Levant was a crossroads of worlds, a mosaic of languages, beliefs, and ancient traditions that had collided, blended, and re-emerged countless times before the Templars ever rode across its sunburned soil. For European knights raised on a steady diet of church doctrine and feudal customs, the East was not just a battlefield. It was an awakening. Every city, every face, every whisper of wind carried a story older than their homeland. Here, in this land of prophets and conquerors, myth and history walked side by side. When the Templars settled in Jerusalem and began to navigate the complex political web of the Holy Land, they encountered not only warriors but scholars, mystics, and travelers shaped by civilizations that had thrived long before Christianity. These interactions were subtle at first: a conversation with a merchant fluent in ancient languages, a question posed to a local elder about the meaning of a carved symbol, a chance meeting with a scholar from Damascus studying the geometry of the heavens. But over time, these small moments formed the foundation of something far deeper, an intellectual and spiritual fusion that forever changed the identity of the order. Unlike many crusaders who dismissed foreign cultures as strange or inferior, the Templars were observers. Their discipline trained them to notice patterns, to listen carefully, to think before acting. And in the East there was much to observe. The knights learned quickly that the Muslims they fought were not ignorant warriors but heirs to a thriving intellectual tradition. Libraries in Baghdad and Cairo preserved works of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy that Europe had forgotten. Scholars in Aleppo debated metaphysics with a sophistication that astonished even the most educated Latin clerics. It was in this environment that the Templars encountered Sufi mystics, men who lived simple lives, devoted to meditation, inner purification, and direct experience of the divine. The Sufis moved quietly through the cities, praying in small lodges, reciting poetry, practicing breathwork that calmed the mind and sharpened perception. To European eyes, their discipline looked strangely familiar. The Templars, bound by vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, recognized something of themselves in these mystics. There are accounts, rare, often dismissed, but persistent, describing Templar knights sitting in conversation with Sufi sheikhs. These meetings were not formal diplomatic exchanges. They were private, curious encounters between men seeking to understand the nature of the soul. What did they discuss? perhaps the structure of prayer, the symbolism of light, or the idea that true courage comes not from rage but from inner stillness. One chronicler, writing decades later, even claimed that a small group of Templars studied breathing practices used by Sufis to enter a state of calm before battle. Whether exaggerated or not, the idea reflects the depth of cultural exchange happening beneath the surface of conflict. The Templars also crossed paths with the Nizari Ismailis, known in Europe as the Assassins. Though often enemies on the battlefield, both groups shared a certain respect for discipline and strategy. The Assassins practiced secrecy, coded communication, and absolute loyalty, qualities that resonated with the Templars' own structure. Some Muslim historians recorded brief truces and even exchanges of gifts between the two orders. A few stories go further, suggesting that the Templars studied the Assassins' methods of organization and adapted certain elements into their own command structure. Whether true or not, the legend speaks to a mutual recognition between two highly disciplined brotherhoods. Beyond mystics and elites, the everyday people of the Levant also shaped the Templars' worldview. Traders from Persia brought tales of ancient Zoroastrian fire temples. Travelers from India and Central Asia carried stories of distant philosophies, sacred geometry, and warrior traditions that blended spirituality with combat. Jewish scholars in Jerusalem preserved fragments of Kabbalistic teachings, interpreting scripture in ways unfamiliar to Latin clergy. Christian monks from ancient Eastern traditions, Syriac, Armenian, Coptic, introduced the Templars to theological perspectives far older and more complex than what existed in Europe. Each encounter left its mark. These influences appeared not in loud declarations but in subtle changes. The symbols the Templars carved into their chapels, the prayers they whispered before battle, the quiet rituals they performed at night. Their architecture reflected geometric principles inspired by Middle Eastern designs. Their command structures mirrored the efficiency of Eastern military networks. Even their famed battlefield discipline, advancing steadily without breaking formation, carried echoes of training methods used by warrior groups in the region. The Levant did something else to the Templars. It broadened their concept of holiness. In Europe, sacredness was tied to churches, relics, and the authority of the church. But in the Holy Land, the Templars encountered people for whom the sacred existed everywhere. In the stars, the wind, the geometry of buildings, the movement of the body, the breath itself. This encounter quietly expanded their understanding of spirituality. It made their rituals more layered, their symbols more complex, their worldview more cosmopolitan. This is why, when the Templars returned to Europe after decades in the East, they appeared transformed. Their churches did not resemble typical Romanesque designs. Their cross was not shaped like the crosses most European knights wore. Their rituals carried elements no Latin cleric could fully explain. And their silence, the deep, controlled stillness that defined them, had a meditative quality unfamiliar to the Western world. Some rulers admired this transformation. Others feared it. A brotherhood that blended Eastern mysticism with Western discipline was unlike anything medieval Europe had ever seen. Whispers spread that the Templars had adopted foreign practices, that their teachings were not entirely Christian, that they guarded knowledge incompatible with the worldview of kings and clergy. These rumors would eventually become fuel for their enemies, twisted, exaggerated, weaponized. Yet the truth was simpler and far more profound. The Templars had learned that no single culture held all wisdom. The Holy Land had shown them a world where ideas traveled freely, surviving through wars and empires. They had witnessed how spirituality could be expressed through poetry, silence, symbols, movement, architecture, and discipline. They discovered that the divine could be approached not only through doctrine but through experience. And they brought this understanding back with them. The Levant became their teacher. Its people, scholars, mystics, and warriors became their silent mentors. And the knowledge they absorbed, willingly or unknowingly, shaped their order in ways that would echo far beyond their lifetime. In time, this fusion of East and West would become a quiet, powerful force within the Templar identity. A force many misunderstood. A force some feared. A force that would later be cited as proof that the Templars guarded not just relics or gold, but knowledge capable of reshaping faith itself. Nightfall inside a Templar commandery was different from nightfall anywhere else. The world outside slipped into darkness with the usual noises of medieval life. Animals settling, hearth fires dying down, guards changing shifts. But within the stone walls of the Templar halls, a deeper silence fell, the kind of silence that felt intentional, deliberate, sacred. It was in this silence that the most secretive and emotionally charged ritual of the order took place. The initiation. Most people imagine knights taking their vows in broad daylight, surrounded by banners and trumpets, with priests blessing their swords. The Templars did nothing of the sort. Their initiation happened behind closed doors, in a chamber lit by a single candle or a dim lantern placed low on the ground. There were no crowds, no family members watching proudly, no clergy reciting long ceremonial blessings. The ceremony was stripped down, raw, somber, designed not to celebrate a beginning, but to confront the initiate with the weight of what he was about to carry. A man seeking to join the Templars did not walk into the order lightly. He had to abandon his property, his inheritance, his name's ambitions. He had to cut all ties except those allowed by the rule, even personal desires, even dreams of marriage, even the comforts of ordinary life. And when he entered the initiation chamber, he came alone. Inside that dim room, he faced the brothers who would soon become his family. Their faces, half-shadowed, half-lit, revealed nothing. The stillness in the air was thick enough to make his heartbeat sound loud to his own ears. The tension was not meant to intimidate him, it was meant to test him. Would he hesitate? Would fear cloud his mind? Would pride break through his composure? The ceremony began with questions, always the same, spoken with calm authority. Was he acting of his own free will? Did he understand the burdens he was accepting? Did he grasp the dangers, the real dangers of belonging to the order? To join the Templars was to accept a life of discipline so strict that even kings envied their unity. It was to accept war as a duty, hardship as a constant companion, and death as an ever-present possibility. And beneath all of this, there was another unspoken truth. Joining the Templars meant entering a world of secrets. Not the kind found in treasure vaults or hidden chambers, though the order had those as well, but internal secrets, the kind shaped through shared rituals, shared silence, shared purpose. To become a Templar was to step into a stream of sacred knowledge that flowed quietly beneath the visible life of the order. The candidate kneeling would be asked if he could carry the weight of obedience. Not obedience to a king or a bishop, but obedience to the rule, a structure so precise and demanding that it reshaped a man from within. If he agreed, the chamber shifted. The brothers moved closer. Their cloaks rustled softly, the only sound in the room. The candidate's eyes adjusted to the faint glow of the lantern. Then came the moment whispered about in medieval courts and later twisted into accusation. The silent vow. The initiate placed his hands in the hands of the commander, a gesture older than the Templars, older than the Crusades, a symbolic act of complete trust. In that moment he surrendered everything. Not to a man, but to the order itself. The vow was spoken quietly, sometimes so softly that only those nearest could hear. It was not theatrical. It was not dramatic. It was profound. The initiate vowed to live in chastity, to obey the rule, to fight with courage, to abandon wealth, to honor his brothers, and to hold the secrets of the order as sacred. And then came the gesture that outsiders would later twist into something sinister. The kiss of peace. The kiss was ancient Christian tradition, a sign of unity. It was placed on the initiate's cheek, his shoulders, or his forehead depending on the region and era. But because these gestures happened in secrecy, behind closed doors, they became fuel for wild accusations when the order fell. People who feared the Templars used these innocent rituals to portray them as corrupt. They never understood that what happened in that chamber was not scandalous. It was spiritual. After the vows, the initiate was given the white mantle, the pure symbol of the order. Receiving it was like stepping into a new skin. The mantle represented sacrifice, purity, brotherhood, and a death to the world he once lived in. For many, the moment overwhelmed them. Men who had ridden through wars without flinching felt tears in their eyes when that mantle settled on their shoulders. But the ritual was not over. Before the initiate left the chamber, he was reminded, softly, almost as if spoken from another world, that the order carried knowledge not shared with outsiders. This final whisper was not meant to inspire pride. It was meant to inspire humility. The initiate was not joining an army. He was joining a lineage. When he stepped out into the cool hallway and saw his fellow brothers waiting in silence, he knew his life had changed forever. From this moment forward, he belonged not to his family, not to his village, not even to his king, but to the sacred order that had claimed his loyalty. The world outside would never understand what happened inside those stone walls. And perhaps that was the point. A ritual so intimate, so steeped in symbolism, could never survive the distortions of rumor or political slander. Yet it was precisely this secrecy, this quiet, sacred bond, that later became the most dangerous part of the Templar identity. For kings and clergy who feared what they could not see, the hidden initiation ritual became a target of suspicion. They imagined darkness where there was solemnity, corruption where there was purity, heresy where there was only devotion. But for the knights themselves, the ritual was a moment of profound transformation, a moment that bound their souls, sharpened their purpose, and sealed their fate. They said the Templars rode into battle with the calm of men already dead. While other knights roared, prayed loudly, or shouted their family names as they charged, the Templars moved like a single, silent wave. Their formation held tight from the first gallop to the last clash of steel. Their breath did not tremble. Their eyes did not flicker. Their minds did not waver. Even chroniclers who despised them could not deny that something different, something almost unnatural, gripped the order in the heat of war. What forged this uncanny stillness? What shaped their unshakable discipline? The answer, many believed, lay in a state the Templars entered before every battle, a state that resembled a trance. In the hours before combat, the Templars did what no European army expected. They withdrew into silence. Their camps were astonishingly quiet. While other troops drank wine, sharpened their swords, bragged about past victories, or shouted threats at the enemy across the field, the Templars knelt in rows. Helmets rested at their feet, eyes closed, hands folded. Their breath moved in steady, controlled waves, as if guided by an invisible rhythm. Witnesses described these moments with awe. Some said the Templars looked like statues carved from white stone. Others recalled a strange tension in the air around them. Not fear, but focus so pure it radiated like heat. It was as if the knights were sinking into the depths of their own minds, stripping away every emotion except purpose. This ritual was not written in any formal chronicle. The rule of the order never described it. But soldiers who fought alongside the Templars repeated the story across decades. Before the charge, the knights entered a stillness that transformed them. A stillness that felt less like preparation and more like awakening. Some historians argue that this state came from intense discipline alone, from years of training and strict obedience. But there is more to the story. The Templars had spent decades in the Holy Land, absorbing its spiritual atmosphere, its philosophical traditions, its ways of calming the mind to face death without terror. Sufi mystics taught breathwork to steady the heart. Eastern monks practiced stillness as a pathway to clarity. Warriors across the Levant entered battle with prayers whispered not to demand protection, but to release fear. The Templars observed and learned. The trance they entered was not a supernatural ability. It was a mastery of the inner world, a fusion of meditation, prayer, and the kind of mental conditioning rarely seen in medieval Europe. This is why their composure felt so strange to outsiders. The knights were not merely brave, they were centered. Emotion distilled into intention. Chaos dissolved into focus. Once the trumpet sounded and the horses began to move, the transformation became even more visible. The Templars launched their charge not with scattered movement, but with terrifying unity. Their horses accelerated together, hooves pounding like a single heartbeat. Their lances angled with precision, creating a deadly wall of wood and iron. Their faces held no distortion of rage, no twisting of fear. Only the same calm they carried in stillness, now projected into motion. Enemy forces often panicked long before impact. There are accounts of entire lines of infantry breaking apart at the sight of the Templar charge. Some swore they saw the knights glowing in the sunlight, white mantles burning against the dust like fire. Others claimed they felt the ground trembling not from hooves, but from some deeper force, conviction, certainty, will. To opponents, this composure looked supernatural. To allies, it looked inhuman. And to chroniclers centuries later, it appeared as something trained into the knights through methods Europe was not prepared to understand. But discipline was only one part of their calm. The Templars believed deeply that their deaths were already written. To them, fear was meaningless. If God had chosen their time, then no arrow could change it. If God had not, then no blade could harm them. This surrender did not make them reckless. It made them invincible in spirit. Their trance before battle was not just about breathing and silence. It was about stepping into a mindset where life and death were equal in weight, where their bodies moved but their souls remained still. Once the clash began, the trance held. Templar units did not break formation even when surrounded. They fought with synchronized precision, turning their horses, shifting their lines, protecting one another with a coordination that came from endless practice and unwavering trust. Each knight became both guardian and weapon, shield for his brother, sword for his cause. This unity was so strong that fragmented crusader armies often reformed around Templar contingents. Chaos gravitated toward their order. Terror softened in their presence. Even kings admitted that no battlefield force commanded loyalty and fear in equal measure like the Templars. But their calm had a darker side. After battles, when the adrenaline faded and the dust settled, the trance left many knights drained. Some sat alone in silence for hours, refusing food. Others walked the perimeter with distant eyes, as if searching for something they had left behind on the field. The mental intensity that made them unstoppable also demanded a price. They were human after all, shaped by discipline, not born of it. The trance protected them during the storm, but once the storm passed, exhaustion swept in. Still, they never abandoned the practice. They embraced it, refined it, guarded it. The initiation rituals strengthened the spirit. The rule shaped the mind. The silence before battle awakened a presence within them deeper than thought. These elements, combined, formed the core of the Templar mindset, a mastery of fear so profound that it blurred the line between courage and transcendence. This is why stories of their supernatural calm persisted long after the order fell. This is why even their enemies spoke of their discipline with respect. And this is why, centuries later, historians still struggle to describe the Templar trance. It was not merely psychological. It was not merely spiritual. It was both and more. It was the bond of brotherhood manifested through breath, silence, and intention, the merging of mind and mission, the transformation of warriors into instruments of purpose. And beneath all of it, there lingered a whisper, the suggestion that the Templars had inherited something from their time in the East, something that shaped their inner world as much as their outer order. A teaching without scripture, passed from knight to knight through example rather than word. Whatever its origin, the trance remained one of the most defining and mysterious aspects of the Templar identity. And it would not be the last mystery to raise questions about what the order truly believed. For centuries, whispers followed the Knights Templar that their lineage was not merely spiritual or military, but royal, that beneath their vows of poverty and humility ran a river of ancient blood. The idea seems impossible at first. The Templars were monks in armor, men who renounced family ties, lands, and heritage. Yet the rumors persisted, weaving through medieval courts and echoing in chronicles written long after the order fell. Some claimed the knights guarded the bloodline of Christ himself. Others insisted they were tied to the forgotten kings of old Europe, the Merovingians, whose long golden hair symbolized divine right and whose dynasty ended in mystery. But why would such stories attach themselves to the Templars at all? The answer lies partly in the aura they carried. A quiet, confident authority that felt older than the Crusades, older than knighthood itself. The founding Templars seemed to move with a sense of destiny, as if they believed, deeply quietly, that they were fulfilling more than a military mission. Hugh de Payens, the order's first Grand Master, carried himself not like a noble seeking favor, but like a guardian fulfilling a vow passed down through generations. Even their seal, two knights riding a single horse, hinted at something hidden, a duality or inheritance beneath the surface. Long before the Crusades, Europe had whispered legends about sacred kings. The Merovingians, rulers of the Frankish kingdoms, were believed to carry a bloodline touched by the divine, a lineage said to descend from a mysterious sea creature, or perhaps from a marriage between a mortal and a supernatural being. They were priest-kings, guardians of rituals lost in time, their rule tied to sacred geography and ancient symbols. When their dynasty collapsed, rumors spread that their lineage had not truly died, but gone underground, protected by loyal families and secret groups. Centuries later, when the Templars rose to power, the old legends resurfaced. Some chroniclers noticed strange parallels. Both the Merovingians and the Templars were connected to the region of Champagne in France. Both were associated with sites of ancient worship, stone circles, sacred groves, old pilgrimage roads, and both possessed an air of mystery that unsettled the powerful. It didn't help that several of the founding Templars came from noble families with rumored links to the old dynasties. Their ancestry was tangled with forgotten houses, vanished kingdoms, and stories told only behind closed doors. Then there were the more dangerous whispers, the ones tying the Templars not to European bloodlines but to Jewish royal lineage. Some said that beneath the Temple Mount, the Templars discovered documents suggesting they were the chosen inheritors of the House of David. A claim like that, if uttered openly, would have shaken thrones across the continent. The idea that the Knights had uncovered genealogies connecting them to biblical kings terrified monarchs who ruled by divine mandate. If the Templars held proof of a royal lineage older and holier than theirs, they could upend the order of Europe. Whether these stories were fantasy or truth mattered little. What mattered was the power of the idea, and how deeply it frightened those already threatened by the order's influence. But the Templars themselves never publicly claimed royal descent. They did not boast of bloodlines. Their vow of poverty forbade such vanity. Yet their behavior sometimes suggested a quiet awareness of inherited purpose. Their protection of pilgrims resembled the ancient role of sacred guardians. Their discipline mirrored priestly orders. Their architecture honored symbols found in ancient temples, not just Christian churches. And their silence, the heavy, deliberate silence that cloaked their rituals, felt like the echo of a forgotten priesthood. When the Templars began building round churches across Europe, structures modeled after the Church of the Holy Sepulchre but also astonishingly similar to ancient temples, the rumors intensified. Round worship spaces had long symbolized cosmic unity, the kingdom of heaven, the sacred throne of kings. Why would an order of monks build such structures unless they were honoring a tradition deeper than Crusader piety? The answer might lie in something more profound than blood: inheritance of purpose. Perhaps the Templars did not claim royal blood because they did not need to. Their sense of destiny came not from genealogy, but from a lineage of spirit. They were heirs to ancient guardianship traditions, the protectors of sacred sites, keepers of hidden knowledge, inheritors of duties passed down through forgotten ages. In this sense, blood of kings may have been metaphorical, describing not flesh but purpose, a chosen lineage, not a genetic one. Yet the world rarely distinguished between metaphor and truth, and so kings grew fearful. If people believed the Templars had a claim to ancient royal descent, they might shift their loyalty. If the Templars possessed knowledge connecting them to the line of David, the Church's authority could be challenged. If they carried the legacy of the Merovingians, some nobles might see them as rightful rulers. Royal blood was political power, and the Templars already held too much. Whether the Templars encouraged these stories or simply allowed them to circulate remains unknown. They never denied them publicly. Perhaps they knew denial would only make the rumors grow. Perhaps they believed the truth, whatever it was, could not be spoken openly. Or perhaps they understood that mystery itself was a shield, a cloak stronger than any armor. But there is one more layer to the story, one rarely spoken aloud. Some medieval writers hinted that the Templars believed all men, regardless of birth, could become kings through inner transformation, that true royalty came from mastery of the spirit, not lineage. A king was one who ruled himself, a knight who conquered his fears, his desires, his ego. He was more royal than any man born on a throne. This idea, radical for its time, blurred the lines between blood and purpose. Perhaps that is why the Templars seemed to move with a destiny beyond birthright. They believed they were chosen not by ancestry but by calling. The rumors of royal blood may have been poetic reflections of something deeper. The sense that the order carried a sacred duty older than nations, older than churches, older than kings. And in a world obsessed with lineage, such belief was just as threatening as actual royal descent. Whether the Templars truly held the blood of ancient kings, or whether they simply embodied the authority of sacred purpose, the effect was the same. Their presence unsettled rulers. Their confidence alarmed the powerful. Their silence invited speculation. And their enemies, when the time came, would use these whispers as weapons, twisting legends of bloodlines into accusations of arrogance, conspiracy, and hidden ambition. The truth behind those rumors remains buried in history's shadows. But the echo of the idea that the Templars carried the spirit or blood of kings shaped the fear, the envy, and the fascination that followed them to their final days. In medieval Europe, maps were little more than sketches, rough outlines of coastlines, guesses at distances, and symbols drawn from memory or rumor. Roads twisted unpredictably, borders shifted with every war, and travelers often relied on instinct more than direction. Yet somewhere in the vast labyrinth of the continent, an invisible network began to form, one more organized, more precise, and more secure than anything Europe had ever seen. It was not created by kings, nor by merchants, nor by scholars. It was built silently and deliberately by the Knights Templar. To the ordinary eye, the Templars' lands scattered across Europe appeared simple. Farms, vineyards, mills, chapels, workshops. Calm, rural places where brothers lived and worked in quiet discipline. But those peaceful properties concealed a carefully engineered system connecting thousands of miles of territory. A system so advanced that some called it the first true map of Europe. It began with safe houses. Every Templar commandery, no matter how small, served as a point on a hidden grid. These sites were placed strategically, near crossroads, river crossings, trade hubs, mountain passes. A knight traveling from England to Jerusalem could stop at Templar houses all along the route, each one offering shelter, food, fresh horses, and protection. This network allowed messages to travel faster under Templar seals than royal letters under crown authority. It allowed money to be moved without risk of bandits. It allowed people, pilgrims, envoys, merchants, to cross borders without fear. Yet there was something deeper behind this network. The Templars built it according to a logic few understood, a geometric order that echoed patterns they had studied under the Temple Mount. Some commanderies aligned with old Roman roads, while others were placed on land once used by pre-Christian priesthoods. It was as if the Templars saw lines drawn across the land that no one else could perceive or dared to follow. Within this invisible grid existed something even more mysterious: coded travel routes. Templar couriers carried instructions written in a cipher known only to high-ranking officers. A message might appear to be a simple blessing or inventory record, but its phrasing revealed which roads to follow, which rivers to avoid, which outposts to trust. The order understood that secrecy was not just a matter of hiding information, it was a matter of movement. To maintain control over their expanding domain, they needed a map that existed in the minds of trusted knights, not on parchment. And so the network grew, from Portugal to Syria, from Scotland to Cyprus, from the plains of Hungary to the ports of Italy. It became the backbone of Templar influence, allowing them to move resources with such precision that kings envied their efficiency. People spoke of the Templars' ability to transport cargo across countries without losing a single coin. Their system worked because it was built on discipline and secrecy. This network also birthed something revolutionary: the Templar banking system. Pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land used to risk everything they owned. Thieves roamed the roads. Brigands hid in forests. Many never reached Jerusalem because they were robbed long before they reached the sea. The Templars changed all of that. A pilgrim could deposit money at a Templar house in London, receive a coded document, travel across Europe with nothing of value on his person, and withdraw his funds in Acre or Jerusalem. Only the Templars could interpret the document. Only they could guarantee its validity. This was more than convenience. It was transformation. The Templars created trust where none had existed. They made long-distance travel safer than it had been for centuries. Their system became so respected that even kings borrowed money from them, relying on their structure more than their own treasuries. But beneath the financial brilliance lay something more enigmatic. Patterns that hinted at a deeper knowledge of geography and design. Some scholars believe the Templars used sacred geometry to plan their routes. Others argue they followed older lines of power, the remnants of Roman engineering or even pre-Roman sacred paths. And then there are those who suggest the Templars saw Europe not as a collection of kingdoms but as a single living network, a body with arteries, veins, and a beating heart. As the order expanded, the map expanded with them. New commanderies appeared almost overnight, sometimes in remote areas that held no obvious strategic value. Why build a Templar house there? Why establish a garrison in a sleepy village miles from trade routes? To outsiders, these decisions made no sense. But to the Templars, each location was a point on a diagram only they understood. In time, the network became so intricate that the order could communicate faster than any monarch. Their couriers did not rely on public roads alone. They used hidden trails, private bridges, tunnels beneath fortresses, and passages through monastic lands. A message could travel from Paris to the coast of Portugal, cross the sea, and reach Acre in a fraction of the time it would take a royal envoy. This unprecedented efficiency frightened kings. A brotherhood that commanded such control over information and money possessed a power greater than political titles. It was a quiet power, invisible to the common eye, but unmistakable to those who understood the value of movement and knowledge. The Templars' map was not drawn on parchment. It was embedded in their minds, their architecture, their rituals. It was shaped by their discoveries beneath the Temple Mount, by their encounters with scholars of the East, by their belief that order, divine order, governed all things. And yet, perhaps the greatest mystery of their network lies in one unanswered question. What information did they move through those routes? Gold, certainly. Letters, of course. But there were also sealed chests, guarded wagons traveling at night, boxes handed from night to night without explanation. Some say these held relics. Others say they held manuscripts found beneath Jerusalem. And some whisper that the Templars moved knowledge, the kind that could change kingdoms, rewrite history, or challenge the authority of church and crown alike. Their network was a map of Europe, but it was also a map of power. Power invisible, power feared, a power that would one day become one of the many reasons the order had to be destroyed. Across the winding roads of medieval France and Spain, pilgrims often stumbled upon strange statues tucked into dim chapels or standing quietly in forest shrines. These figures, carved from dark stone or painted in deep black hues, represented the Virgin Mary, but not the fair, luminous figure familiar from church art. These statues were different. Their faces were serene yet ancient, their presence powerful, their expressions heavy with mystery. They became known as Black Madonnas. While ordinary travelers passed them with curiosity or reverence, the Knights Templar seemed drawn to them with unusual attention. Wherever the order built or restored chapels, Black Madonnas appeared. Wherever Templar routes crossed through Europe, these statues marked their passage like silent guardians carved from myth and shadow. No one knows when the Templars first encountered the Black Madonna tradition, but the connection between the two became so persistent that later chroniclers wondered whether the order had adopted her as a hidden emblem. The church tolerated the Black Madonnas but never celebrated them. They were too unusual, too ancient, too reminiscent of something older than Christian iconography. Some priests whispered that these dark statues carried traces of forgotten goddess worship, echoes of Isis in Egypt, Asherah of the Levant, or the ancient mother cults of Europe. And yet the Templars embraced them. To understand why, we must look at what the Black Madonna represented. Unlike the white marble Madonnas sculpted in European cathedrals, the Black Madonna was not designed to appear delicate or distant. She was earthbound, timeless, almost primordial. Her darkness symbolized mystery, the unknown, the cosmos, the sacred feminine that existed before written scripture. She embodied endurance, healing, and transformation. Her statues were said to cure illness, grant visions, and protect travelers on dangerous roads. For the Templars, men who guarded mysteries, wandered across continents, and sought divine truth in hidden places. She was more than a symbol. She was a reflection of the deeper spiritual currents they encountered in the Holy Land. When the Templars lived atop the Temple Mount, they learned about traditions that predated Christianity by thousands of years. They heard stories of ancient priestesses serving at Solomon's temple, of sacred objects hidden beneath the earth, of the Shekinah, the feminine presence of God described in Jewish mysticism. These ideas left an imprint on the Knights, shaping their understanding of the divine as both powerful and mysterious, structured and fluid, warrior and healer. The Black Madonna carried that same duality. In France, the Templars built churches where her image occupied the central altar, bathed not in the brilliant sunlight of stained glass but in the soft glow of candles. In Spain, they established sanctuaries where pilgrims knelt before her, their prayers echoing against stone walls carved with symbols the order favored: stars, circles, intertwined vines. In some regions, locals claimed the Templars guarded the statues during times of unrest, moving them secretly from one hidden chapel to another to protect them from destruction. Why such devotion? Some historians believe the Templars saw the Black Madonna as a bridge between the old world and the new, an embodiment of continuity in a land torn by war and shifting faiths. Others argue that the order found in her a representation of wisdom older than church doctrine, wisdom they believed must be preserved. And there are those who whisper something more daring, that the Templars believed the Black Madonna symbolized a secret lineage or teaching they discovered in Jerusalem. One legend claims that beneath the Temple Mount, the Templars found carvings of dark-skinned female figures associated with the ancient priesthood. Another says they uncovered scrolls describing a sacred feminine presence suppressed or forgotten in later texts. If true, it would explain why the Templars embraced an icon the Church regarded with suspicion but tolerated due to her popularity among the faithful. Whatever the origin of their fascination, the Templars treated the Black Madonna with quiet reverence. Not loudly, not publicly, but consistently. Their chapels often faced celestial alignments that illuminated her face during solstices or equinoxes. Their architecture emphasized curves and circles rather than harsh angles, echoing ancient mother temples. The knights who traveled on dangerous routes frequently stopped to pray before her, asking for protection not just over their bodies but over their mission. Some Templar graves even bear symbols associated with the Black Madonna, subtle carvings that resemble inverted triangles, spirals, or seated mother figures. These markings are rare but significant. They hint at a personal devotion carried to the grave. There is a story told in the Languedoc region of southern France, where the Templars once held powerful estates. It describes a knight who was gravely wounded in battle and left behind during a retreat. Villagers found him near death and carried him to a small church with a Black Madonna at its center. For 3 days, he lay barely breathing, candles flickering near the statue. On the 4th morning, he rose weak but alive. When asked what happened, he whispered, "The lady watched over me." No one knew whether he meant Mary, the Madonna, or something older, but the legend endured. To the Templars, the Black Madonna symbolized protection, resilience, and sacred mystery. She was the dark womb of the earth, the quiet strength beneath war, the hidden presence behind visible faith. She reminded the knights that divine truth did not always shine in blinding light. Sometimes it waited in the shadows, carved in stone, silent and enduring. Yet this devotion came with consequences. As suspicion toward the order grew, so did accusations that the Templars worshipped idols or strange figures forbidden by the Church. During their trials, interrogators twisted their reverence into scandal, claiming they adored a mysterious black-headed figure or bowed before a secret icon. These accusations almost certainly sprang from ignorance or malice, distortions of their respect for symbols misunderstood by the outside world. But the damage was done. Where the Templars saw ancient wisdom, their enemies saw heresy. Where the order saw a sacred figure of protection, the Church saw a threat to orthodoxy. And where the knights saw a bridge between old and new, kings saw an unsettling reminder that the order followed not just Christian power but spiritual currents beyond royal control. The Black Madonna stood at the intersection of those fears. Mysterious, unyielding, beautiful, a silent witness to the rise and fall of the order that honored her. And though the Templars vanished, her statues remained. Still dark, still powerful, still shrouded in mystery. Their presence hints at a secret the order never revealed, that the path of the sacred is not always illuminated by light. Sometimes it is revealed in the shadows. Long before their downfall, long before accusations twisted their reputation into legend, the Knights Templar were known for possessing something far more dangerous than gold or land knowledge. Not the kind taught in monasteries or whispered in royal courts, but knowledge gathered from the edges of the known world, preserved in volumes that most of Europe had forgotten, ignored, or forbidden. These writings did not sit openly on lecterns or library tables. They were locked in chests, stored in fortified towers, guarded by oaths stronger than iron. Some said the Templars had become not only warriors of God, but keepers of forbidden books. In an age when literacy was rare and books were precious, the idea of a private Templar library carried a certain allure. Monks preserved scripture. Scholars translated Aristotle. But the Templars collected something else entirely. As they traveled between Europe and the Holy Land, they gathered texts from merchants, mystics, and scholars who carried the intellectual heritage of ancient civilizations. They found writings in Greek, Latin, Hebrew, Syriac, and Arabic. Some were elegant manuscripts copied by dedicated scribes. Others were tattered scrolls rescued from crumbling temples or forgotten caves. The world often imagines the Templars as soldiers first, monks second, and scholars almost not at all. But the truth is more complex. Within the order were men trained in languages, philosophy, mathematics, and theology. They were tasked with advising commanders, negotiating with rulers, and deciphering maps and codes. These men kept their libraries alive, even as their brothers fought battles across desert plains. The Templar libraries were not enormous, but they were selective, curated with precision. They contained works that aligned with the order's mission, strategically, spiritually, or symbolically. Writings about sacred geometry, accounts of ancient rituals, early Christian gospels that never entered the New Testament, commentaries on mystical practices that blended prayer and silence, manuals of engineering and architecture, treatises on celestial navigation, documents describing the Temple of Solomon in remarkable detail. One of the most whispered about collections was the bundle of apocryphal Gospels. These texts, often dismissed as heretical by church authorities, presented interpretations of the life and teachings of Jesus that differed from accepted doctrine. Some emphasized wisdom over obedience. Others suggested secrets shared only with a small circle of disciples. While the church insisted these writings were dangerous, the Templars preserved them, perhaps for study, perhaps for protection, perhaps because they believed truth could not be confined to a single official version. Alongside the Gospels were mystical texts brought from the East. Sufi poetry written in flowing script describing the soul's journey toward divine love. Hermetic writings discussing the nature of creation, the elements, and hidden laws of the universe. Works by early alchemists exploring the transformation of matter, and, metaphorically, the transformation of the self. These ideas were not entirely foreign to medieval Christian thought, but they were considered suspicious, even dangerous, when presented outside church-approved frameworks. Yet the Templars were fascinated. They had walked the streets of Jerusalem. They had studied the Temple Mount. They had spoken to scholars of different faiths. They had seen firsthand that truth often took multiple forms. Their libraries contained knowledge not to challenge the church, but to understand the world more deeply, to see the divine not only in scripture, but in patterns, symbols, and the hidden structure of creation. The most controversial writings in their possession, however, were the alchemical texts. Alchemy in the Middle Ages was not merely a quest to turn lead into gold. It was a spiritual system disguised as a scientific one. It taught that matter reflected the soul, that transformation of the physical mirrored transformation of the inner being. Diagrams of circles, triangles, and intertwining serpents filled the pages. Recipes for elixirs mixed with allegories about purification, sacrifice, and rebirth. Some sections were cryptic, veiled deliberately to prevent misuse. Others hinted at secret correspondences between numbers, shapes, and cosmic forces. To the Templars, an order founded in mystery, such ideas were irresistible. If their excavations beneath the Temple Mount had revealed relics, symbols, or writings connected to ancient priesthoods, it is no wonder they sought texts that helped decode those discoveries. Whether they found carved symbols or fragments of forgotten wisdom, they needed context. Alchemy, Hermeticism, and Jewish mysticism provided frameworks for interpreting very old ideas. But storing such books came with risk. Church authorities feared knowledge they could not control. They feared texts that suggested alternate paths to understanding God, paths not mediated by clergy. The Templars' refusal to share their books fueled suspicion. Rumors spread that the knights studied sorcery, consorted with demons, or practiced magic. These accusations were baseless, but power thrives on fear, and mystery breeds accusations. The order did not deny possessing unusual books, but they guarded the contents fiercely. The libraries were locked. Access was restricted. Only certain brothers, educated, trustworthy, sworn to silence, were allowed to study them. Even so, some of the writings leaked into Europe, influencing scholars who would later ignite the Renaissance. There are stories, half legend, half truth, about a set of scrolls the Templars transported from Jerusalem to France. These scrolls, said to contain detailed measurements of the lost Temple of Solomon, became the foundation for the Templars' architectural style. Their round churches, proportional layouts, and symbolic carvings all echoed the geometry of the ancient temple. If such scrolls existed, they would indeed be considered forbidden, not because they were heretical, but because they challenged the Church's monopoly on sacred interpretation. Some believe the Templars found writings even older than the temple, fragments of ancient Canaanite rituals or Babylonian cosmology. Others claim the order discovered early Christian writings suppressed after the Council of Nicaea. Whether these stories are true or not, they reflect a real fear that the Templars possessed knowledge capable of reshaping belief. And perhaps that fear was justified. The order's power came not from weapons or wealth, but from understanding. Their libraries shaped their worldview, their architecture, their discipline, their rituals. They saw connections others overlooked, patterns in scripture, patterns in stone, patterns in the human spirit. When the Templars were arrested, one of the first things the king's agents demanded was access to their chests, their sealed rooms, their written records. Most were confiscated. Many vanished into royal vaults. Some were burned, and others, according to rumor, were hidden by the knights before the arrests began. Carried to remote commanderies, buried beneath chapels, or smuggled aboard ships that vanished into legend. These were not just books. They were keys. Keys to ideas older than kingdoms. Keys to knowledge Europe was not ready to face. Keys to mysteries the Templars vowed to protect. And though the order fell, the memory of their forbidden library lingers, an echo of a time when warriors guarded not just bodies, but wisdom. For most of Europe, the Holy Grail was a chalice, the cup Christ used at the Last Supper, the vessel that caught his blood at the crucifixion. It shimmered in poetry and sermons as a divine relic of unimaginable power. But to the Templars, the Grail was never simply a cup. Their silence on the subject, their symbols carved into chapels, their cryptic references in documents long lost, all suggested that the order held a more profound, more unsettling interpretation. In their world, the Grail was not an object at all. It was an idea. The stories began long before the Templars rose to power. In the 12th century, poets across Europe suddenly wrote tales of a mysterious vessel guarded by warrior monks in a hidden fortress. The Grail appeared as a stone, a book, a glowing dish, and sometimes not a physical object, but a state of grace. Strangely, these stories emerged at the same time the Templars solidified their authority in the Holy Land. Some chroniclers believed the knights themselves inspired the tales, their secrecy fueling imaginations. Others suspected the opposite, that the poets had heard whispers of something the Templars actually found beneath the Temple Mount. Whatever the truth, the connection stuck. But the Templars themselves never sought the Grail publicly. They never claimed to possess it. They never displayed a relic resembling it. Yet their reputation kept circling back to the myth. Kings asked if they guarded it. Clergy questioned whether they searched for it. Ordinary people believed the knights used it to win battles. And when the order fell, interrogators demanded to know where the Grail was hidden. The Templars, chained and exhausted, responded only with silence. Their refusal fueled suspicions, but it also revealed the possibility that the Grail, as they understood it, was not something that could be seized or locked in a vault. Some historians argue the Templars' concept of the Grail came from ancient Jewish and early Christian writings. Scrolls found near the Temple Mount described sacred vessels that held not blood, but knowledge, wisdom passed from priest to priest. In this tradition, the Grail symbolized a teaching, not a cup, something revealed only to those prepared to receive it. If the Templars uncovered such texts, they may have reinterpreted the Grail not as a relic of Christ, but as a relic of truth, divine understanding preserved across ages. Others believe the Grail represented a lineage. This theory, popularized in modern times, suggests the vessel was a metaphor for a bloodline descending from Christ or ancient kings. Whether true or not, the idea haunted medieval rulers. If the Templars held proof of such a lineage, the foundations of royal authority would tremble. Some whispered that Hugh de Payens and his companions learned of this secret in Jerusalem and vowed to protect it. But there is no evidence the Templars themselves ever spoke of a bloodline. They protected families, relics, and knowledge, but none of their own writings mention such a claim. Another, more esoteric interpretation connects the Grail to transformation, not of matter but of the soul. In this view, the Grail is the inner vessel within every human being, capable of receiving divine presence. The knights, trained through silence, discipline, and ritual, may have believed the Grail represented spiritual awakening. Their battles, their vows, their hours of meditation were not simply acts of service. They were stages in a personal quest. The Grail, then, was the ultimate state of purity and clarity, achieved not through possession but through devotion. This interpretation explains something unusual about the Templars: their unbroken calm, their trance-like focus in battle, their ability to face death without fear. Men who sought enlightenment through discipline would naturally gravitate towards symbols of inner transformation. Their rituals, once misinterpreted as heresy, may have been designed to guide initiates toward this state, the Grail within. There is one more theory, whispered in the margins of manuscripts and retold in fireside legends. It suggests the Templars found an object in Jerusalem, but not a cup, a text, a teaching, something so profound that even kings would seek to destroy it. According to this legend, the Grail was a document containing a vision of Christianity not based on fear or rigid hierarchy, but on direct communion with the divine, a message that threatened the authority of both monarchs and clergy. If such a document existed, it would explain the desperate attempts to eradicate the order and seize their archives. But if the Templars held such a teaching, why did it vanish? Perhaps it never did. Perhaps it lived on through whispered traditions, through symbols carved into stone, through rituals that survived in successor orders long after the Templars were gone. Some believe the Grail symbolism re-emerged in Freemasonry, in Rosicrucian circles, in secret societies across Europe, not as a relic, but as a guiding idea. The belief that spiritual truth is not confined to churches or crowns but discovered through personal revelation. The Templars never declared what the Grail meant to them, yet their architecture revealed clues. In round churches mirroring the dome of the rock, in carvings of chalices intertwined with vines, in mosaics of stars representing the heavens, in hidden symbols etched carefully into stone, circles within circles, a shape found in both early Christian mysticism and Eastern philosophical texts. These designs suggest a Grail not of metal, but of meaning, a vessel that holds knowledge, a vessel that holds transformation, a vessel that holds the soul. When interrogators later demanded to know the whereabouts of the Grail, some knights laughed, others grew quiet, but none pointed to a physical object. For them, the Grail was not something that could be surrendered or stolen. It was a teaching, a legacy, a truth carried in the mind and spirit, something that lived beyond chains, beyond torture, beyond the fall of the order itself. Perhaps that is why the myth has endured for centuries. Objects decay, chalices are lost, relics vanish. But ideas, especially dangerous, liberating ideas, cannot be burned, broken, or buried. Whether the Templars themselves shaped the myth of the Grail or merely preserved a deeper understanding of it, the result was the same. A symbol that outlived their enemies, their order, and their age. A symbol that continues to inspire, confuse, and provoke. A symbol that hints at the possibility that the greatest treasures are not found in vaults or temples, but in the transformation of the human heart. And perhaps that is the real secret the Templars carried. In the quiet countryside of Europe, far from the heat of battle and the roar of crusades, the Templars built churches that confused and fascinated ordinary villagers. Unlike typical rectangular parish churches, these structures rose in perfect circles or precise polygons, their walls aligned with strange accuracy, their windows casting patterns of light that seemed more deliberate than decorative. People walked into these sacred spaces feeling something they could not name, as if the air inside vibrated differently, as if some hidden rhythm flowed through the stone. These churches were not accidents of architecture. They were designed with intention born from the Holy Land. The knights who had spent years on the Temple Mount carried with them an understanding of sacred geometry, that the divine might be revealed in shapes, symmetry, and sunlight. To most medieval believers, holiness lived in relics and rituals. But to the Templars, holiness also lived in proportions. It began with light. Templar architects observed how sunlight struck the dome of the rock at dawn and dusk, marking the solstices and equinoxes with precision older than any Crusader kingdom. They noticed that ancient structures aligned not only to the cardinal directions but to stars, constellations, and seasonal cycles. These alignments were not merely astronomical. They were spiritual, intended to bind heaven and earth in a single architectural gesture. When the knights returned to Europe, they carried this knowledge not as curiosity, but as sacred inheritance. They began to design churches as instruments of illumination. On specific days, beams of sunlight passed through windows to strike particular spots. An altar, a carving, a column. Sometimes the light formed shapes, a circle, a cross, a star. Other times it moved slowly across the floor like a glowing messenger marking the passage of celestial time. Villagers saw this and whispered that the knights possessed secret wisdom. Priests blessed it but could not fully explain it. Only the Templars understood the underlying principle. Alignment revealed meaning. These alignments were not random. They followed hidden codes, patterns the knights believed echoed the architecture of Solomon's temple. Some researchers argue that the Templar round churches were modeled after the Holy Sepulchre. But the truth is more complex. Their structures echoed the shape of ancient stone circles, pagan sanctuaries, and the cosmic diagrams used by Jewish and Muslim scholars alike. The Templars blended these influences into something uniquely their own, a sacred blueprint written in stone. A round church is not merely beautiful. It is symbolic. The circle has no beginning and no end. It represents eternity, unity, the divine. It mirrors the dome of the heavens above. In Templar hands, it became a vessel for spiritual focus, a geometric prayer. Some of their churches featured 12 columns representing the apostles, arranged in perfect symmetry around a central altar. Others contained octagonal designs that mirrored the dome of the rock. The Templars believed these shapes connected worshippers to something larger than doctrine, to the universal patterns that formed creation. But architecture alone did not explain the strange feeling inside these churches. There was also sound. The Templars constructed their structures with acoustics in mind. A whispered prayer could travel gracefully through a circular chamber, amplifying subtly, lingering in the air. Chanting resonated with unusual depth, turning simple hymns into haunting, enveloping waves. In some churches, the design created standing tones that vibrated in the stone itself. Worshippers standing at the right point could feel the sound reverberate through their bones. Medieval villagers did not have the language to describe this, but they knew intuitively that Templar churches felt alive. There were other, more cryptic features too. In some chapels, tiny carved figures, angels, animals, stars, were placed with mathematical exactness. Each had meaning, though only Templar architects knew the full code. In others, hidden chambers sat beneath the floor, not used for burials but possibly for contemplation or secret meetings. In a few churches, labyrinth designs were carved into the stone, spiraling inward like a path toward inner revelation. Even more mysterious were the markings on the exterior walls, faint carvings that resembled astronomical charts or geometric patterns. Some believed these were symbols meant to guide travelers. Others thought they were maps of sacred sites. Modern historians argue they were coded references to ancient knowledge the Templars acquired in the Holy Land. Measurements of the Temple Mount, diagrams of celestial movements, or interpretations of sacred mathematics. To the Templars, geometry was not mere calculation. It was the language of God. The idea came from multiple sources: Greek philosophy, Jewish mysticism, Islamic architecture. In Jerusalem, they saw how builders used mathematics to create beauty and meaning simultaneously. They learned that numbers held symbolic power: 3 for the Trinity, 7 for creation, 12 for divine order. They saw these numbers reflected in ancient structures, and they carried this reverence back to Europe. The Templars believed that by building churches aligned with the cosmos, they were participating in divine creation. Stone by stone, they shaped earthly space to reflect heavenly truth. The faithful who entered these spaces felt it, even if they could not articulate why. A Templar church invited contemplation, not through fear or grandeur, but through harmony. It made the invisible feel present. But such precision raised suspicion. Ordinary clergy could not understand why the knights cared so deeply about alignments, proportions, or hidden chambers. Some suspected the Templars were practicing secret rituals within these spaces. Interrogators during the trials later twisted this into accusations of idol worship or sorcery. They demanded explanations for symbols carved in stone, for the unusual shapes of certain chapels, for the strange architectural choices that seemed foreign to European tradition. The Templars refused to explain, not out of arrogance but out of loyalty. Their knowledge was not meant for interrogation rooms. It was meant for those who walked the path, those trained to see the divine in stone and shadow, in sunlight and angles, in silence and sound. And so their churches remained enigmas. Some still stand today, round and resilient, their columns holding secrets in the stillness of their geometry. Modern visitors walk through them unaware that every beam of light and every echo was placed with intention. The design whispers, but only quietly, waiting for someone who knows how to listen. For the Templars, these buildings were more than places of worship. They were lessons in stone, maps of the cosmos, reflections of the inner temple each knight sought to build within himself. A temple not of walls, but of understanding. A temple aligned not with earthly kings, but with the rhythm of the stars. Years before the infamous Dawn Raid, before soldiers broke down doors and dragged knights through the streets, long shadows had already begun to gather around the Templar order. It happened slowly at first, almost imperceptibly. A disappearance here, a suspicious fire there, a document going missing under unexplained circumstances. And yet, when viewed in hindsight, the signs were unmistakable. Something was approaching, something darker and more calculated than the Brotherhood could have imagined. The earliest warnings came from the fringes of the network. A Templar commandery in northern France reported strange visitors asking pointed questions about their archives. Another in Champagne claimed its messenger had vanished on the road while carrying correspondence to Paris. At first, the knights dismissed these events as ordinary risks of travel and political tension. But then the patterns grew. A treasury room in Poitiers was found unlocked, though nothing was stolen. A Templar granary in Burgundy went up in flames on a calm night, with no wind and no lightning in sight. Witnesses swore they saw cloaked figures leaving the scene, moving with unnatural haste. And in a quiet commandery near Avignon, brothers discovered that a sealed chest, one used only for sensitive documents, had been opened without force. The papers inside had been rearranged, as if someone had searched through them with calculated care. The knights did not panic. They were trained to face danger with calm. But whispers began circulating among the older brothers. The king was watching them more closely. Philip IV, known for his ambition and cruelty, had begun tightening his grip on France in every direction. Seizing money from Jewish communities, persecuting bankers, taxing clergy. Anyone who had wealth or influence became a target. And the Templars, with their lands, their treasure, their mysterious archives, were a tempting prize. Still, the order believed itself untouchable. They were the warriors of Christ, answerable only to the Pope. They had bled for Europe, protected pilgrims, built fortresses, and secured routes no army could control. But power, even holy power, becomes dangerous when kings grow desperate. The real shift came when rumors of lost scrolls began to surface. A group of Templars returning from the east carried with them a protected chest. They had been entrusted to bring it directly to Paris. But when they reached France, the chest was missing. The knights insisted they had been ambushed in a forest, that their attackers spoke with local accents, not foreign ones. The chest had been taken, its contents unknown. Some speculated it held relics. Others believed it contained coded documents, perhaps records from the Temple Mount, perhaps letters from Eastern scholars, perhaps something more volatile. The disappearance caused quiet panic within the higher ranks. If sensitive information had fallen into the wrong hands, the order could be vulnerable. They began reinforcing their archives, moving documents from open rooms to deep vaults, adding extra guards to treasuries. But the sense of unease remained. Something unseen was circling the order like a hawk waiting for the right moment to strike. Then, one autumn evening, a Templar messenger staggered into a commandery near Paris, bleeding and half-conscious. Before he died, he delivered a cryptic warning. "Beware the man in shadows. He speaks with the voice of the king." No one knew his name. No one knew what exactly he meant. But the implication was clear. Someone close to Philip was orchestrating a quiet investigation, one that would not end well. Meanwhile, the king's advisors began planting stories among the populace. Subtle, poisonous rumors that the Templars practiced strange rituals in the dark, that they bowed before an idol, that they possessed knowledge the church feared, that they questioned doctrine, that they had grown too wealthy, too powerful, too independent. These whispers spread like smoke. Some nobles grew uneasy. Priests began to wonder what the knights truly did behind closed doors. Merchants whispered that the Templars' banking practices undercut the kingdom's treasury. And in royal circles, certain men, particularly those who owed the Templars money, encouraged the king's suspicion. By the time the year 1307 approached, tension had become a living presence. The Templars felt it in the stiffness of royal messengers, the increasing delays from papal envoys, the icy politeness in the king's tone when meeting Jacques de Molay. Something was shifting behind courtly smiles. Then came the final warning, subtle but ominous. A Templar commander in Paris noticed that royal scribes had been seen copying documents late into the night. Not royal documents, but forged accusations. Testimonies that no one had given. Confessions that no Templar had signed. Signatures that did not match. All prepared in advance for some unknown purpose. The commander reported this to the Grand Master. Jacques de Molay, seasoned by decades of struggle, insisted the king would not dare harm the order without cause. But even he felt a tightening in his chest, the uneasy sense that an invisible net had been creeping around them for years. And then the strange fires began. 2 Templar barns burned in the same month. A scriptorium was consumed by flames that left no trace of candle or spark. Witnesses reported seeing torches near the walls just before the fires ignited. The knights extinguished the flames, salvaged what they could, and prayed for clarity. But the message was clear. Someone wanted their resources crippled, their attention fractured, their defenses weakened. Autumn deepened into October, bringing a chill that felt heavier than cold air. The Templars continued their work, unaware that the king's agents had been finalizing orders for a synchronized arrest across France. An operation so secret that even high-ranking ministers knew nothing of it. The knights slept in their commanderies, prayed in their chapels, tended to the poor, and maintained their routes. But beneath the surface, the world was turning against them. The signs had been there all along. Shadows, disappearances, forged papers, mysterious fires. Everything pointed toward a single truth the Order refused to believe. Their fall was not a sudden strike of fate. It was a slow, careful construction, a trap laid stone by stone, a doom already written long before the torches arrived. The doors slammed shut behind them with a thud that echoed like a death sentence. The Templars, once warriors feared across continents, now stood as prisoners in stone cells that smelled of damp straw and old despair. Their white mantles, symbols of purity and valor, were torn, stained, or stripped away. In their place hung chains, cold, merciless, unforgiving. What awaited them in the days ahead was not battle, not debate, not trial by honor. What awaited them was a system designed to break their bodies, twist their words, and shatter their truth. The interrogations began almost immediately. Royal agents, men hardened by years of extracting confessions for the king, entered the prisons with parchment, quills, and a chilling calm. They claimed they were there for answers, but the truth was simpler. They had already written the accusations. They merely needed signatures. Signatures squeezed out through pain, terror, and exhaustion. One by one, the knights were dragged from their cells. Some were seasoned warriors who had survived sieges, starvation, and endless desert marches. Others were humble serving brothers, more accustomed to tending gardens or horses than facing torture. Yet they all met the same fate. The first stage was interrogation without violence. Questions delivered politely, almost gently. Do you confess to denying Christ? Did you spit on the cross at your initiation? Did you worship a demon in secret? The knights rejected each claim. Their voices were steady, disciplined. They spoke with clarity, insisting on innocence. But the interrogators were not there to listen. They were there to record guilt. When the knights refused to cooperate, the tone shifted. Lanterns dimmed, doors locked. Instruments of torment were brought out. Not suddenly, but ceremoniously, as if performing a ritual of their own. There were the ropes used for the strappado, where a man's arms were twisted behind his back and hoisted until joints tore. There were iron boots heated until flesh blistered. There were metal pincers, whips tipped with iron beads, and tables designed to stretch the human body into something unrecognizable. Some knights tried to remain composed as the interrogators approached. They prayed silently, whispered psalms, or fixed their gaze upward as if seeing a vision no one else could. But even the strongest spirits trembled when the torture began. In one chamber, a Templar named Pierre was suspended by his wrists until his shoulders cracked. Witnesses later said he fainted twice, revived only to faint again, his body unable to withstand the strain. When asked once more if he would confess, he whispered through bloodied lips, "I cannot confess to lies." The interrogator signaled to tighten the ropes. Pierre screamed, a raw, human sound that echoed through the corridors. Hours later, he signed the confession placed before him. Not because he was guilty, because he could no longer feel his arms. In another chamber, a young serving brother named Guillaume was whipped until his back resembled torn parchment. He had joined the order out of devotion, not ambition. He had tended to the order's horses, cleaned their hallways, baked bread for his brothers. Yet the interrogators accused him of abominations he could not even understand. Through tears he begged for mercy, insisting he had seen nothing, done nothing. They told him the pain would stop only when the truth came out. He confessed to everything written on the page. There were moments, however, when even torture failed to break them. One night, Geoffroy de Charnay refused to speak despite days of torment. His captors beat him, starved him, left him hanging by his wrists until his hands turned blue. Yet he would not confess. When they demanded why he resisted, he said, "My brothers stood beside me in honor. How can I betray them now?" His defiance became legendary among the prisoners. But defiance came at a cost. He was thrown into the darkest cell, denied food, denied rest, denied company. Still he endured. What made the torture even more devastating was the way the interrogators manipulated fear. They whispered to the knights that others had already confessed. They claimed the church had abandoned them. They insisted resistance was futile. Some Templars, exhausted and terrified, believed them, and sometimes the whispers were true. Under unbearable suffering, certain knights gave in. They confessed to crimes they never committed. They described rituals that never happened, demons no one had worshipped, idols no one had seen. They did not speak truth, they spoke pain. Their words were shaped not by memory but by agony. Yet something remarkable emerged in the confessions. Amid the contradictions, amid the forced statements, certain details repeated. Tiny scraps of truth buried beneath layers of torment. Many knights mentioned secrecy. Many spoke of oaths spoken in dimly lit rooms. Many described rituals of silence, of symbolic gestures, of hidden teachings known only to the initiated. These details were not scandalous. They were not heretical. They were misunderstood echoes of real Templar traditions. But as the interrogators wrote them down, they twisted them into something grotesque. A kiss of peace became perversion. A vow of silence became demonic secrecy. A hidden teaching became pagan worship. Truth under torture became a monster. Outside the prisons, the world watched in confusion. Some believed the accusations. Others refused to accept them. But no one knew the depth of suffering the knights endured behind those stone walls. They did not see the bruises, the broken bones, the hollowed faces of men who had once ridden into battle without fear. They did not hear the prayers whispered through cracked lips or the cries stifled by exhaustion. For months the torture continued. Some knights died under questioning. Their bodies were buried quietly, without ceremony. Others survived long enough to sign confessions, only to be thrown back into cells to await further interrogation. A few tried to recant when the pain ceased, insisting their signatures meant nothing. The king's agents punished them even more harshly for daring to contradict their forced words. Jacques de Molay himself faced torture, not as aggressively as others, but enough to crush a man of lesser resolve. He signed a confession under pressure, then later took it back in public, declaring his innocence before the people of Paris. His recantation infuriated the king. It sealed his fate. As the months turned to years, the prisoners changed. Some grew quiet, retreating into their memories. Others found strength in faith, singing hymns softly in their cells. A few lost themselves completely, their minds shattered by pain and isolation. Yet even in the depths of torment, a spark of brotherhood endured. Knights who could no longer walk were supported by others. Those with fading voices whispered encouragement to new prisoners. In the darkest conditions, the Templar discipline that once shaped them for battle now shaped them for survival. Their confessions were carved out of horror. But within the chaos lay a disturbing truth. The more the interrogators tortured, the more they revealed their own fear. Fear that the Templars had carried something real. Fear that their silence held meaning. Fear that beneath all the accusations, a hidden doctrine, their true treasure, still existed. The king could force confessions. He could break bodies. He could burn flesh. But he could not extinguish the last ember of truth the order guarded. And that lingering truth, whatever it was, terrified him more than anything the knights could ever confess. Across the scattered landscapes of Europe, from the fog-coated coasts of England to the sun-baked plains of the Mediterranean, the Templar commanderies once stood like quiet fortresses of discipline and purpose. Some were grand stone complexes. Others were humble farmsteads run by a handful of brothers tending livestock and managing fields. But when the arrests began in October 1307, something strange happened in many of these places. Something that left villagers whispering for generations. The commanderies did not fall with chaos. They fell into silence. In dozens of locations, royal soldiers expecting resistance instead found empty courtyards and half-lit halls. Doors creaked in the wind. The scent of extinguished candles lingered in the air. Tables remained set for meals, bowls of porridge cooling, bread partially sliced, pitchers of water still beating with condensation. Cloaks hung neatly on pegs. Work tools lay where they had been placed moments earlier. It was as if the knights had risen from their tasks and simply vanished. The soldiers searched bedrooms with straw mattresses still warm, kitchens with fires just beginning to fade, chapels where scripture lay open as though a reading had been interrupted. In one commandery, a pot of stew simmered on the hearth, untouched but freshly seasoned. In another, a scribe's quill lay in the middle of a sentence, ink still wet as if the writer had been pulled away in the middle of thought. But the knights were gone. Some who witnessed these scenes believed the Templars had been warned in advance. Yet there were no signs of hurried escape, no overturned furniture, no scattered tools, no abandoned wagons. The departures seemed too calm, too orderly. It was as though the knights had prepared for this moment long before it came. In the region of Auvergne, villagers claimed they saw a line of horses moving down a wooded path the night before the arrests. No torches, no banners, only dark silhouettes gliding through the moonlight with eerie quiet. The riders did not speak, and their faces were hidden beneath their hoods. By morning, the commandery they had left behind was deserted. Similar reports surfaced in Normandy, Languedoc, and northern Spain. In each case, locals described the same thing. Wagon wheels creaking softly in the night, carts covered in heavy cloth, knights speaking in hushed tones as they loaded sealed chests and wrapped bundles. No one knew what they carried, but all agreed that whatever it was, it mattered deeply. There was one account from rural Portugal, where an elderly shepherd swore he saw brothers carrying a chest so heavy it required 6 men. The chest was bound in iron, its edges carved with symbols the shepherd did not recognize. The men moved with urgency, but not panic, as if following instructions long memorized. That commandery, too, was found empty at dawn. Not every outpost was abandoned. Some knights stayed, believing loyalty required obedience even unto death. But the ones who vanished left behind a mystery historians still cannot fully unravel. Where did they go? Some may have fled north into Scotland, which remained outside the king's reach due to its war with England. Others may have joined Templar fleets stationed on the Atlantic coast. And some may have disappeared into monastic communities, hiding their identities to evade capture. But there was something else, something more elusive, that connected the abandoned commanderies. Missing records. Not just treasure. Not just coins or property. The documents were missing. Ledgers, maps, letters, ritual books, architectural plans, genealogies, lists of correspondence, inventories of relics. Not a scrap of sensitive information remained in the vacated houses. Soldiers searching for evidence to justify the king's accusations found nothing. It was as if the Templars had swept their commanderies clean of data, leaving behind only the mundane. This was no coincidence. It suggested planning, foresight, an understanding that their order might one day face extinction, and a strategy for preserving what truly mattered. The abandoned commanderies were not signs of fear, but of preparation. Then there were the stranger accounts, the ones whispered too quietly to be recorded in official chronicles. In a mountainous region of Lombardy, a farmer claimed to see a procession of knights entering a cave hidden behind a waterfall. Days later, soldiers searched the area and found nothing. No knights, no cave, no evidence of human presence at all. In the hills of Aragon, 2 hunters reported seeing monks burying something beneath an ancient oak tree under moonlight. When they returned the next day, the ground showed no sign of disturbance. Legends? Possibly. But such stories spread quickly, weaving themselves into the tapestry of Templar mystery. The missing commanderies became a symbol of what the Templars truly feared. Not death, not imprisonment, but the loss of their legacy. Their silent exits suggested a mission to protect whatever knowledge, treasure, or truth they held. Something the king could never seize. Some historians believe these vanished knights carried documents from the Temple Mount, relics from the early church, or coded archives of the order's rituals. Others think they transported wealth intended to fund a continuation of Templar ideals in secret. And there are those who whisper that the Templars who vanished carried only one thing: their faith, their discipline, their inner teachings, preserved in hidden sanctuaries far from royal reach. Whatever they carried it with purpose. Their absence was not empty. It was eloquent, It spoke of a brotherhood that refused to be erased, that refused to hand over its deepest truths to a king who envied them, hated them, and feared them. It spoke of loyalty that outlasted walls, of secrecy that survived torture, of a mission that transcended the order's physical fall. When the soldiers finally realized how many commanderies were empty, how many knights were missing, and how much information had slipped through their fingers, it was too late. The network had dissolved into shadows. The brothers had vanished like ghosts. But the emptiness they left behind did not feel like defeat. Felt like intention, like the beginning of a hidden chapter, not the end of a visible one. And in time, these lost commanderies would become the birthplace of legends, stories of treasure, of secret survivors, of knowledge passed quietly from generation to generation. Stories that hinted that the Templars did not simply fall. They scattered, they hid, they endured. The port of La Rochelle slept under a blanket of fog, its wooden piers stretching like skeletal fingers into the Atlantic. The air smelled of salt and tar, mingled with the distant cry of gulls circling above invisible waters. It was a quiet harbor, far quieter than the great ports of the Mediterranean, yet it held something no other harbor in France possessed: the Templar fleet. For years, rumors swirled about these ships. Some said they were ordinary vessels used for trade and transport. Others insisted they were sleek and fast, built for long-distance voyages and capable of outrunning any royal navy. The truth lay somewhere in between. The fleet was practical, efficient, and reliable, designed not for war but for movement. It carried pilgrims to the Holy Land, brought supplies to distant commanderies, and transported the Order's resources across continents. But the fleet was also something else, a lifeline, a means of escape should the world ever turn against them. And when the world finally did, the ships vanished. No one saw them leave. No one heard the creak of their ropes or the splash of the oars. By the time King Philip's officers reached La Rochelle with orders to seize the vessels, the harbor was empty. Every mooring point stood bare, as if the ships had never existed at all. Only the faint marks of dragged ropes, the impressions of barrels once stacked along the pier, and the lingering smell of pitch suggested the Templars had been there recently. The king's men stood on the fog-coated planks and looked out into a gray horizon, baffled. They searched the coastline, interrogated dockworkers, and sent scouts along the shore. But the fleet was gone. Gone with such precision, such perfect timing, that the only reasonable conclusion was that the Templars knew the arrests were coming, and they had left before the trap closed. But where did they go? Theories blossomed like wildflowers after rain. Some claimed the ships sailed north toward England, yet England, embroiled in conflict, was not a safe haven. Others insisted the fleet headed to Scotland, whose king, Robert the Bruce, defied the Pope and refused to condemn the order. Scotland was possible, and legends there indeed spoke of mysterious warriors who appeared at Bannockburn years later. But the distances, though not unimaginable, raised questions. More intriguing were the stories from Portugal. Portugal had long been friendly to the Templars. Its kings valued their military expertise and welcomed their presence along the frontier. When the order fell, Portugal did not pursue the knights with the same eagerness as France. Some suggest the fleet sailed there, docking quietly under the protection of local allies. Indeed, in the years following the dissolution of the Templars, a new order emerged in Portugal, the Order of Christ, composed of many former Templars and supported by the crown. But Portugal was not the only possibility. There were whispers, soft, hesitant, of a journey far more daring, that the fleet crossed the Atlantic. Centuries before Columbus, sailors along the western coasts of Europe knew of strange lands beyond the sea. Tales passed down by Norse explorers, Basque fishermen, and Celtic navigators. The Templars, with their sophisticated network and access to ancient charts, may have heard these stories. Some believe they possessed knowledge of routes mapped long before their time, routes found in scrolls acquired in the Holy Land or among Arabic maritime texts. If any order of medieval knights had such knowledge, it was them. Yet even these bold theories fail to explain the most perplexing detail. How did the fleet leave unnoticed? La Rochelle was a busy port, filled with sailors, merchants, and fishermen. It was impossible to move even a single ship without attracting attention, much less an entire fleet. And yet the Templars did it. Some suggested the ships left during a storm, concealing their passage in thunder and darkness. Others claimed the fleet departed weeks before the arrests, under the guise of routine transport. A few stories even claimed the Templars used underground tunnels leading to hidden slipways outside the main harbor. The truth is likely simpler and more profound. The Templars were masters of timing. Their network spanned continents with precision. Their couriers moved faster than royal messengers. Their commanderies communicated with codes and signals the outside world never understood. If word reached them, just days or even hours before the king's orders were executed, they would have had enough time to slip away. A single warning, a single message, and they were gone. But what did they carry? This question haunted the king more than their escape. Soldiers who raided the Templars' Paris treasury found almost no gold, an impossible result, given the order's wealth. Many assumed the treasure had been moved. But what if the treasure wasn't gold at all? What if the fleet carried something far more valuable? Documents, relics, artifacts, coded knowledge, or objects recovered from the Temple Mount centuries earlier. Some historians argue the fleet carried the order's archives. Others believe it transported relics sacred to the Templars, perhaps even the mysterious chest rumored to have been discovered beneath Jerusalem. A few more daring theories suggest the fleet carried the order's genealogical records, their ritual texts, or evidence that threatened the church's narrative. Whatever the cargo, it vanished with the ships. A monk in a nearby convent wrote years later that he saw, on the night before the arrests, a procession of Templars moving toward the coast under the moonlight, carrying long, heavy trunks. He claimed they loaded them onto ships in near silence, speaking only in hushed tones. When the last trunk was secured, the ships slipped into the water, their sails unfurled to catch a westward wind. In the morning, the docks were empty. Was the monk's story true? No one knows. But it echoed across generations as a fragment of a larger mystery. Then there were the maritime logs, small, forgotten entries in port records from coastal towns in Galicia, Brittany, and the Portuguese Algarve. Several mention unfamiliar ships sighted far from shore around the same time. One described vessels bearing banners of a red cross, moving swiftly along the horizon. Another noted a group of ships anchored briefly offshore before disappearing again. And then the trail went cold. The Templar fleet dissolved into legend. But legends, especially those born in shadow, rarely fade entirely. In Scotland, traditions speak of white-cloaked knights appearing unexpectedly to aid Robert the Bruce at a crucial moment in battle. In Portugal, the Order of Christ rose with Templar symbols embedded in its rituals. In the Azores, early settlers told stories of stone structures that predated their arrival, structures some researchers later associated with medieval European craftsmanship. None of this proves the fleet fled to distant shores. But none of it disproves it, either. The ships that vanished from La Rochelle did not sink. They did not break apart. They did not reappear in any known harbor. They escaped with purpose, with coordination, with intent. And whatever they carried, wealth, relics, knowledge, or secrets, they carried it to safety. The king seized the Templars. He seized their lands. He seized their bodies. But their fleet, their freedom, slipped through his fingers like water. And somewhere, across the waves, the order's most guarded truth found refuge. The fortress prison rose above the landscape like a wound carved into the earth. A place where sunlight dimmed and voices rotted in stone. Towering walls swallowed sound. Iron bars embraced hopelessness. Damp air clung to every corridor as if the very stones breathed with despair. In these walls, the Templars, once knights who thundered across battlefields like storms, now became shadows of themselves. Their swords were gone, their mantles stripped away, their brotherhood battered by months of isolation, torture, and lies. Yet something pulsed beneath the suffering, something the king never expected. Brotherhood survived. Not the proud, public fraternity proclaimed in ceremonies or carved in seals, but a quieter, deeper loyalty that emerged when everything else had been torn away. This was the brotherhood forged not through victory, but through captivity. through hunger, through pain, through nights when hope seemed like a rumor drifting from another world. The prison guards tried to break them individually, separating knights into narrow cells, depriving them of light, depriving them of speech, depriving them of any reminder that they were not alone. But human voices find ways through stone. A cough, a whispered prayer, a knuckle tapping a code on the wall. The Templars created language within confinement. Soft calls in the dark, fragments of psalms carried through cracks in the masonry. Small rhythms tapped in patterns only their brothers understood. They rebuilt connection in silence, weaving strength from the only thread left to them, each other. Some guards noticed and punished them. Others pretended not to hear. There was one guard, a young man barely grown, who later admitted in secret confession that he deliberately slowed his walk so the brothers had time to exchange signals. He claimed their calm unsettled him more than their defiance. They behaved, he said trembling, as if they feared nothing earthly. In the darkest part of winter, when cells froze and the Templars' thin garments offered little protection, the brothers created warmth by sharing whispered memories. They recited battle scenes from Acre, where they had stood shoulder to shoulder with shields locked. They spoke of feasts shared after long fasts, of laughter echoing inside stone halls, of long rides across the countryside where wind and prayer carried them forward like wings. Those memories, fragile but luminous, became their comfort. They became the fire that torture could not extinguish. Sometimes, a guard would drag a knight down the corridor, his feet scraping the stone, his body limp. The others listening in their cells could hear him pass. Every breath, every moan. When the guard returned hours later, the knight's voice would tremble through cracks in the stone as he whispered reassurance. "I did not dishonor you. I did not break." Those words meant more than any oath sworn under banners of white and red. But not all could bear the torment. Some knights broke under pressure. No one judged them. When a brother returned to his cell after confessing to crimes he had never committed, he carried shame like an infection. But the others whispered through the darkness, "You are still our brother." And in that whisper, forgiveness grew. Humanity, even more than discipline, bound them now. In one corner cell, an elderly knight named Amory grew so weak he could no longer stand. The cold seeped into his bones until he trembled uncontrollably. A younger serving brother slept pressed against the wall beside his cell, hoping his body heat would somehow pass through the stones. It didn't, but the intention did, and in that intention, Amory found strength to live one more night. On certain days, the prisoners were allowed into a communal courtyard, a rare concession meant to prevent death by despair. Here, for brief minutes under a winter sky, the Templars saw one another's faces. Many had aged 10 years in a single season. Some bore burns on their skin, others walked with shuffling steps, their ankles raw from shackles. Yet when they recognized their brothers, their eyes lit with something miraculous. It was not joy, not defiance, but recognition of shared suffering, the bond that grows only in darkness. They were not allowed to speak, but they did not need words. A hand placed lightly on another's arm, a brief meeting of eyes, a subtle nod. These gestures became their language, their vow, their promise that even in chains, they remained knights. There were moments of incredible courage. One day, a young knight named Etienne collapsed in the courtyard, overcome by fever. The guards lifted him roughly, but a senior Templar stepped forward instinctively to help. The guards raised their clubs, but the knight did not retreat. "He is my brother," he said simply. The blow that followed broke his ribs, yet he did not cry out. Etienne, barely conscious, reached out and touched the older knight's hand, a gesture so soft it seemed almost like prayer. Moments like this spread strength through the prisoners like wildfire. The interrogators grew frustrated. They had expected division. They had expected betrayal. They had expected the order to disintegrate under pressure. Instead, the more they tortured the Templars, the more the knights clung to one another. Some guards grew afraid. "They do not fear pain," one said, trembling. "They fear only the thought of failing each other." In their cells, the Templars began creating small rituals, quiet, secret acts of solidarity. They pressed fingertips to the walls at dawn in silent prayer, knowing their brothers were doing the same in adjacent cells. They chanted softly after dark, building harmony through stone. They saved crumbs of bread to pass along when a brother was starving. In their minds, they recited the rule of the order, renewing vows no one could take from them. A strange calm took root in the prison. The Templars, who had once carried swords and rode horses like thunder, now carried something invisible. A discipline so deep that even captivity could not erode it. They had become monks of survival, warriors of endurance, guardians not of the temple, but of their own dignity. And the king, watching from his palace, could not comprehend how men he had broken continued to stand unbroken in spirit. One night, a guard overheard chanting so soft it was almost a breath. It rose from the cells like smoke, fragile but persistent. He approached the corridor, expecting rebellion. Instead, he saw a row of men on their knees, heads bowed, praying for one another. There was no anger in their voices, only serenity. He stepped back, shaken. "These men," he whispered later, "are already free, even though they are locked behind stone." The brotherhood that survived in those dungeons was not the brotherhood carved on shields or declared in chapters. It was something deeper, a loyalty forged through suffering, born in the crucible of silence and pain. The Templars had lost their order, their lands, their reputations, their futures, but they had not lost each other. And in the heart of the prison, that was enough to keep hope alive. Winter clung to Paris like a shroud on the morning they brought Jacques de Molay to the riverbank. The sky hung low, heavy with gray clouds that swallowed the sun. A cold wind drifted off the Seine, carrying with it the scent of damp stone, extinguished torches, and the bitter perfume of burning pitch. People gathered along the quay, murmuring, shifting, clutching their cloaks tighter. No one spoke loudly. No one dared. For this was no ordinary execution. This was the burning of a grand master. Jacques de Molay stepped forward between two guards, his chains rattling softly with each movement. He was older now, ravaged by years in a dungeon, his beard long and white, his once strong posture bent by torture and cold. Yet there remained something unmistakable in his gaze, a dignity that no cruelty could break. His eyes were steady, clear, almost serene. The crowd, expecting a broken old man, saw instead the quiet presence of a leader who had already accepted his fate. The pyre rose before him, a cruel architecture of stacked wood soaked in oil. At its center stood a tall wooden pillar where he would be bound. The flames had not yet been lit, but the sparks flickered in the hands of executioners waiting for the signal. The crackling of burning tar barrels nearby filled the silence with a sinister rhythm. One of the king's envoys stepped forward, unrolling a scroll. The charges were read again: treason, heresy, blasphemy, secret rites, idol worship, lies built on lies. Words de Molay had heard so many times they no longer pierced him. He closed his eyes gently, as if listening not to the accusations but to some distant voice. A memory, a prayer, a brotherhood echoing in his mind. When the envoy finished, silence washed across the crowd. Then, with unexpected force, Jacques de Molay lifted his head. "I declare," he said, his voice hoarse but unwavering, "before heaven and earth, that our order is innocent. We are condemned by falsehood. We are betrayed by those we served." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A guard stepped forward to silence him, but the envoy held up a hand. The king wanted a confession. Perhaps he hoped de Molay would finally break, recant his recantation, and absolve Philip of the sin he was about to commit. But Jacques de Molay did not bow. His next words would carve themselves into the memory of Europe. "I appeal," he said slowly, deliberately, "to the judgment of God. Let him decide between us. Let him reveal the truth." Some in the crowd crossed themselves. Others whispered in fear. A few guards shifted nervously, sensing that something dangerous, spiritually dangerous, had just been spoken aloud. The envoy frowned, realizing that instead of a confession, the king had received a curse. Jacques de Molay, Grand Master of the Knights Templar, raised his voice again, louder now, stronger. "King Philip, Pope Clement, before the year is out, I summon you to stand with me before the throne of God, to answer for what you have done." The crowd recoiled as if struck. To curse a king? To summon a pope? To do so moments before death? It was unthinkable, blasphemous, terrifying. But Jacques de Molay did not speak out of rage. His tone was calm, his gaze steady, his words delivered not like a threat, but like a prophecy. The guards grabbed his arms and dragged him toward the pillar. They tied him tightly with ropes, winding them around his chest and legs, fixing him upright so he could not fall when the flames rose. Some executioners hurried, rattled by his curse. Others tried to act indifferent, but none could avoid the chill that swept down their spines. When the ropes were secured, the executioner approached with a torch. The flames burned bright orange, licking at the air with hunger. He hesitated, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of pity. But the crowd pushed forward, restless, and the king's envoys signaled impatiently. The torch touched the wood. At first, there was only a thin curl of smoke, drifting upward like a ghost. Then flames began to whisper through the dry kindling, crackling softly before rising higher, brighter, hotter. The fire climbed the pyre, and soon it roared, swallowing the base in sheets of orange and gold. Heat washed over the crowd. Some stepped back. Others stood rooted, mesmerized. Jacques de Molay did not scream. He did not beg. He stood tall, even as flames licked at his feet, rising toward his robes. His chains glowed red against the mounting heat. His beard curled with ember sparks. Yet his eyes remained fixed on the horizon, as if watching something unfold beyond the visible world. Witnesses later said his voice carried over the flames, chanting prayers even as fire consumed him. Others said he looked like a priest performing a final rite. A few swore the flames bent away from him longer than they should have, as if reluctant to touch him. But eventually, the fire climbed, crackling around him, swallowing his mantle, turning wood and flesh into ash. Still, he did not cry out. He died as he had lived, in silence, in devotion, in unshakable conviction. When his body finally fell still, the flames continued to burn, smoldering through the long evening until smoke curled toward the darkening sky like a final offering. The crowd dispersed in uneasy quiet. Some whispered that the king had gone too far. Others muttered that no curse could touch a monarch or pope. But many did not speak at all, haunted by the calm with which Jacques de Molay had embraced death. 2 months later, Pope Clement V fell gravely ill. 8 months later, King Philip IV died suddenly in a hunting accident. Both men gone within the year, just as he had said. Some called it coincidence. Others called it divine justice. Many believed the Grand Master's curse had marked their souls like a brand of fire. But the execution did something far more profound than curse two men. It transformed Jacques de Molay into a symbol, a martyr whose death carried the final dignity of a brotherhood betrayed. For the Templars who survived in hiding, his last stand became the heartbeat of their identity. For common people across Europe, his death planted seeds of doubt about the charges, making the king's victory feel hollow. And for history itself, the flames on that riverbank illuminated a truth that could not be killed. The Templars did not die in disgrace. They died in silence, loyalty, and conviction. And the fire meant to destroy them instead ignited their legend. Jacques de Molay's ashes drifted into the Seine that night, carried by the river's eternal current. But his final words, and the brotherhood he led, continued flowing through time, untouched by flame, untouched by kings. Some truths cannot be burned. Some loyalties cannot be chained. Some legacies refuse to die. And the story of the Templars was far from over. After the flames that consumed Jacques de Molay faded into the night, a strange silence settled over France. A silence heavy with unease, like the stillness that follows a storm but does not promise peace. The king had won. The Templars were scattered, imprisoned, tortured, executed, or forced into hiding. Their commanderies had been seized, their lands taken, their reputations dragged through the mud by lies carefully crafted to justify their destruction. Yet something unsettling lingered in the air, something the king could not burn away. The Templars were gone, but not entirely. Whispers began to circulate in taverns, in monasteries, in the quiet corners of peasant villages. Some claimed to have seen knights in white mantles slipping through forests at dusk. Others swore they heard hooves on lonely roads long after curfew, horses moving in tight formation with no torchlight to guide them. There were rumors of a secret network still breathing beneath the ashes of the old order. A brotherhood united by suffering, bound by vows that no prison walls could erase. The survivors moved like smoke, unseen, untouched, unfinished. Some fled north, toward lands where the king's influence weakened with every mile. Scotland, ravaged by war but fiercely independent, became a place of refuge. Robert the Bruce, excommunicated by the church and embattled against England, welcomed any ally willing to fight beside him. And so, legends emerged, tales of mysterious riders appearing at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, their discipline and formation unlike anything the Scots had seen. They rode like the Templars. They fought like the Templars. They vanished like the Templars. Were they truly survivors of the order? No chronicler could confirm it, but the story endured. Others traveled west and south, slipping into Portugal under the cloak of secrecy. There, the king refused to condemn them. He knew their history, their loyalty, their contribution to the birth of his nation. And so, in one of the quietest and most strategic acts of political maneuvering in medieval Europe, he reconstituted the order under a new name, the Order of Christ. The same men, the same symbols, the same mission, a new banner, a new beginning. For years, the Templars lived openly in Portugal, wearing different mantles but practicing familiar discipline. They built ships, they mapped coastlines, they taught navigation and geometry, and in time, their knowledge would help propel Portugal into an era of exploration that reshaped the world. But not all survivors sought refuge in kingdoms. Some slipped into monastic life, hiding their identities beneath robes of brown or black. They traded swords for ink, battlefields for scriptoriums, writing scripture with hands once trained to wield blades. In certain monasteries, strange symbols appeared in the margins of manuscripts, secret marks known only to Templar initiates. Subtle reminders that the order endured, even in silence. There were also those who vanished into ordinary life. Farmers, craftsmen, merchants. These men carried their vows into the rhythms of daily existence, living humbly yet holding their brotherhood like a hidden ember inside their hearts. They taught their children discipline, respect, silence. Some built small chapels in remote woods, circular in shape, reminiscent of Templar churches. Private sanctuaries where they prayed for the brothers they had lost. But perhaps the most mysterious survivors were those who traveled east. Rumors sprang up in Cyprus, in Crete, in Armenia, in the mountains of Anatolia. Stories told of white-mantled knights entering the service of local kings or slipping into communities of Christian monks in the east. In some tales, they guarded ancient monasteries. In others, they sought out the same mystical traditions they once encountered beneath the Temple Mount. A few stories claimed they protected relics or manuscripts the king had been unable to seize, knowledge carried out of France on horseback or hidden aboard the fleet that vanished from La Rochelle. What made these stories powerful was not proof, but possibility. The Templars were trained in movement, secrecy, and survival. Their network had spanned continents. Their ability to disappear from a commandery overnight had already been demonstrated. It was entirely plausible that the king had destroyed only what he could see, not what remained just beyond his reach. Then there were the symbols. Across Europe, stones bore unfamiliar marks. 2 riders on one horse, a cross within a circle, a red cross faintly painted in forgotten chapels. Historians dismissed these as remnants of old commanderies. But in some cases, the symbols were carved long after the order fell. Quiet acts of remembrance. Quiet statements of survival. One of the strangest stories came from southern France, where villagers spoke of a hooded man who appeared every year on the anniversary of the arrests. He stood before the ruins of a Templar chapel, recited a prayer, and vanished into the hills. Some said he was the last Templar in the region. Others said he was one of many, moving from place to place, keeping the memory alive. And then there were the manuscripts. Years after the order's downfall, scholars discovered documents written in elegant Latin, describing Templar rituals, travels, and teachings. Some of these were forgeries. Others were exaggerated, but a few bore unmistakable markers of authenticity: ink formulas known only to Templar scribes, script patterns unique to their training, and coded lines referencing events only an initiate could know. These texts suggested that survivors had continued writing long after the order was declared extinct. Even more mysterious were the labyrinthine family chronicles, found in remote castles belonging to minor noble houses. These chronicles described ancestors who were Templars but spoke in terms of survival, not martyrdom. They hinted at secret gatherings, hidden altars, vows renewed in forests lit only by moonlight. No dates, no names, only symbols. It is impossible to know how many of these accounts hold truth. But taken together, they paint a picture the king never intended. The Templars did not die. They transformed. They melted into the world like iron dissolving in fire, reshaping themselves into forms the king could not trace. Sailors, monks, explorers, architects, hermits, soldiers, teachers. Their brotherhood shifted from a visible institution to an invisible lineage, carried not through official chapters but through memory, loyalty, and the unspoken promise that the order's mission was not finished. The king believed he had erased them, but he misunderstood the power of conviction. He misunderstood the depth of a vow taken in torchlit halls before a brotherhood older than nations. He misunderstood the discipline of men who had faced death on battlefields and found peace in its shadow. The Templars' fall was not the end. It was the scattering of seeds. Those seeds took root in hidden corners of Europe, in the hearts of survivors, in the minds of those who admired them, in the myths that blossomed from their ashes. And in time, those myths would shape secret societies, architectural traditions, esoteric philosophies, and the dreams of explorers. Survival for the Templars was not physical. It was spiritual, symbolic, enduring. And though kings could crush bodies, seize treasures, and burn grandmasters, they could not extinguish the one thing no fire can touch: legacy. After the fall of the Templars, Europe expected silence. Instead, something stranger happened. The order seemed to echo through time. Their symbols appeared in cathedrals, in Mason guilds, in manuscripts written long after they vanished. Even kings and popes could not erase them completely. Stone masons began carving patterns that looked unmistakably Templar: circles, stars, twin rider motifs. These workers had repaired former Templar sites, absorbing their designs like apprentices absorbing a master's secrets. Over time, these guilds evolved into early Freemasonry, which inherited not just symbols but values: discipline, secrecy, brotherhood, enlightenment. In Portugal, the Order of Christ, born from surviving Templars, funded voyages that opened the world. The same Red Cross the Knights once carried fluttered on the sails of explorers crossing the Atlantic and rounding Africa. Even in revolutions, their name resurfaced. French revolutionaries invoked Jacques de Molay as a martyr against tyranny. Americans designing a new republic adopted symbols and philosophies that echoed Templar ideals of liberty and moral duty. But the deeper mystery lay in countless small details. Letters sealed with crosses centuries after the order ended, architectural designs echoing Templar geometry, forgotten manuscripts referencing the continuing brotherhood. Whether these connections were literal or symbolic hardly mattered. Their legacy flowed into new traditions, new nations, new eras. The Templars became more than men. They became symbols of loyalty, courage, and forbidden wisdom. Centuries after the Templars vanished, their story continues to breathe in ruins, symbols, and the imagination of the world. People walk through the remains of Templar commanderies and feel an inexplicable stillness, as if the walls remember the footsteps of men who lived with rare purpose. Their true treasure may never have been gold or relics. It may have been the way they lived, with conviction strong enough to withstand torture, silence strong enough to defy kings, loyalty strong enough to outlast death. Jacques de Molay's final words were not a curse. They were a declaration that truth cannot be burned away. The Templars became a mirror for humanity. Each era reshaped them into whatever it needed: guardians of wisdom, martyrs of justice, symbols of resistance. And in every retelling, their core message remained: purpose gives a life power. Perhaps that is the Templars' final secret, that meaning is stronger than fear, and that legacy is not carved in stone but carried inside the human spirit. The order died, but the ideals they embodied did not. They flicker today in anyone who stands for something larger than themselves. The Templar story does not end in fire, continues wherever truth still matters. In the modern world, surrounded by screens, concrete, and endless noise, the Templars appear more alive than ever. Their symbols hide in chapels, manuscripts, and ruins. Their absence feels deliberate, as though they left behind puzzles meant for future generations to interpret. People continue searching for their treasure, but perhaps the treasure is not physical. Perhaps it is the longing they awaken, the desire for clarity, unity, and purpose in a fractured age. Their story pulls at something deep within us, the hope that life can be lived with conviction. Templar sites still radiate a strange atmosphere. In Tomar, Portugal, sunlight reveals patterns that seem intentional. In France, after rain, carvings appear briefly on old stones. In England, equinox light warms specific sections of Templar chapels. Whether legend or truth, these moments feed the mystery. The Templars endure because they symbolize something we fear we've lost: a life anchored to meaning. The modern seeker traces their symbols not to find gold, but to feel connected to something larger, older, deeper. Their survival is not physical but spiritual. They live in the minds of those who search for purpose. History moves on, but the Templars remain, not as a living order but as a question. Their story challenges us. What do we protect? What do we stand for? What truth would we defend even if the world opposed us? The Templars were destroyed by kings, yet their ideals outlived every throne. Their courage, discipline, and loyalty survived in symbols, secret traditions, and the imagination of humanity. Their legacy transformed after death, carried not by institutions but by individuals who felt drawn to their story. In a world of uncertainty, the Templars represent clarity. In a world of apathy, they represent purpose. Their fall reminds us that injustice is powerful, but never eternal. Their endurance reminds us that ideas cannot be executed. They can only be carried forward by those who believe in them. Perhaps the greatest Templar secret was never hidden treasure. Perhaps it was the way they lived. Their flame appears today in anyone who protects truth, who stands against corruption, who acts with courage when no one is watching. These are the modern guardians of the Templar spirit. The order ended. The meaning did not. The Templars survived not as warriors, but as an idea, a light passed from century to century, waiting for its next guardian.